Chapter 707. Zhao Zheng's gaze swept across everyone's faces. All he saw was astonishment and disbelief. Based on their reactions, it was impossible to tell who the traitor was. The people present all moved away from each other and looked at their companions suspiciously. The atmosphere immediately became tense. After an unknown period of time, an imperial censor finally broke the silence. He asked with a pale face, "Your Highness, the guards of Feng Province have surrounded this place. What should we do?" Zhao Jing also knew that this wasn't the time to catch the traitor. If they continued to suspect the traitor, they would be in a mess before the enemy moved. No matter who the spy planted by Zhao Yi was, the most important thing at this moment was to calm this matter down. This matter was very sensitive. Before he reached an agreement with his father emperor, it wouldn't be good for them if this matter was blown up. The person he sent to deliver the report this morning had probably just left Feng Province. Even if it was urgent, it would take at least half a month for him to make a round trip. "Let's go." Zhao Jing waved his hand and walked out of the door. The imperial censors followed closely behind him. Outside the relay station, the door opened and several figures walked out. The provincial governor of Feng Province cupped his hands and said, "Your Highness." "Official Zhou, there's no need to be so polite." A smile appeared on Zhao Zheng's face as he said, "I don't know where Official Zhou heard the rumor. Everyone here is an imperial censor, an official appointed by the imperial court. We all serve the country wholeheartedly. How could there be someone with ulterior motives who wants to mess up the foundation of our Qi kingdom? It's just a misunderstanding." As a prince of a country, when did he speak so submissively to an insignificant provincial governor? Zhao Zheng had a smile on his face, but the anger in his heart was almost uncontrollable. Provincial Governor Zhou also smiled and said, it's okay. Whether it's a misunderstanding or not, we will know after investigating." Zhao Zheng was startled. His gaze gradually turned cold as he asked, "How do you want to investigate?" Provincial Governor Zhou pointed to the imperial censors behind him and said, "Capture a few people and interrogate them. This concerns the continuation of our Qi kingdom. I believe your Highness won't mind using a little punishment, right?" "How dare you?" Zhao Zheng could no longer conceal his anger. He turned around and walked into the relay station coldly saying, "I am right here. Come in if you have the guts." "What are we going in for?" Provincial Governor Zhou was startled. He turned around and waved his hand saying, "Guard properly. Other than the first prince, don't let anyone out." On a horse at the back, Zhao Yi looked at the tightly shut door of the relay station. He turned his horse around and disappeared behind the many guards. Inside the relay station, Zhao Zheng, who had flipped the table, smashed the chair as well. He angrily said, "Send a letter to the capital. Say that the third prince, Zhao Yi, has colluded with the provincial governor of Feng Province to imprison I and the other imperial censors. They are plotting a rebellion." Outside the relay station, the provincial governor of Feng Province handed an urgent letter to the person behind him and said, "The first imperial prince is working together with the supervising imperial censor to carry out the law of subjugation. The provincial governor of Feng Province does not dare to act rashly. Everything is left to the Son of Heaven to decide." The security of Feng Province had improved over the past 2 days. At least, there were no incidents of soldiers randomly arresting people on the streets. The commoners were slightly relieved. At first, they were curious and surprised by the sudden change. However, the dense crowd of people outside the relay station was not just for show. Soon, the commoners knew what had happened. The third imperial prince and the provincial governor led the guards to surround the relay station. Other than the first imperial prince and a few others, none of the officials from the capital were allowed to come out. Even the 500 personal guards of the first imperial prince didn't dare to act rashly under the pressure of the guards. Because of this, they naturally couldn't go everywhere to investigate the officials of Feng Province. In the past few days, the first imperial prince had led the supervising imperial censor to arrest some corrupt officials. At first, people thought that he was really thinking about the commoners. Later on, they realized that these people had come to oppose the third imperial prince. They had stirred up trouble in Feng Province, causing chaos in Feng Province and the neighboring counties. The local officials and commoners had been suppressing their anger. In the past 2 days, they had finally vented their anger. When Li Yi walked back from the market with a chicken and a fish in his hands, he deeply felt the joy in the hearts of the people of Feng Province. Just now, when he bought the fish, the peddler had casually erased the 10 copper coins. It should be known that a few days ago, Li Yi had seen him arguing with an auntie who was buying vegetables for half an hour over a copper coin. How could there be such senseless people in the world? They had argued for so long over a copper coin. His legs were sore from watching them from the side. However, the reaction of the commoners in the city still surprised him. What surprised him was that this level was not enough at all. If this method was really implemented in the Qi kingdom, all the rich people would be lords in the future. They wouldn't have to go to jail if they killed someone. All they had to do was pay. If they saw an innocent woman on the street, they could just rob her and pay the money. He had no lack of money. In this way, his previous dream could be realized quickly. Although the first imperial prince was not a fool, the silver system that he had written to the first imperial prince was not a fool. In fact, even if this system was really implemented, ordinary people would still be sentenced to death if they killed someone. Those who raped an innocent woman would at least be exiled. Only officials who had made small mistakes could use this method to escape punishment. However, the commoners didn't know about this. The commoners had always been a very fragile group. If you said that the first imperial prince was going to implement the silver system and that they could escape punishment by paying the money, they would think that the first imperial prince was not going to let poor people like them live. If the commoners knew about this, Feng province would be in an uproar. The uproar hadn't happened yet, which meant that the commoners didn't know about it. This was Zhao Yi's fault. He had worked so hard to build bridges and roads for him. He couldn't just stay at home and do nothing. It was so disappointing that he needed him to remind him about this kind of thing. The extremely intelligent third imperial prince couldn't even be compared to a storyteller in his brothel. It was late at night in King Feng's mansion. The third prince, Zhao Yi, a scholar in green, an old monk with white hair and a beard, and a middle-aged monk with an iron rod in his hand stood in front of a door somewhere. There was a dagger stuck in the door and there was a piece of paper on the dagger. There were words on the paper. The scholar in green frowned and turned to ask, "Your Royal Highness, this?" Zhao Yi pointed to the back and said, "When I returned to my room it was already stuck in the door." The monk with the iron rod reminded him, "Be careful. Might be a trap." "I don't think so." Zhao Yi shook his head. A similar situation appeared in his mind. Just as he was about to reach out, the monk was one step ahead of him. He slowly pulled out the dagger, took the piece of paper, and walked into the brightly lit room. The others followed him in. Zhao Yi walked over and asked, "What's written on the paper?" The old monk, who was walking in front, poked his head out to take a look and said, "Preventing the people's mouths is more important than blocking a river. If you don't beat a drowning dog now, what are you waiting for?" Preventing the people's mouths is more important than blocking a river? The middle-aged monk frowned and asked, "What do you mean?" The middle-aged scholar waved his fan and said, "This is from the language of Zhou. There's a saying in the language of Guoyu, preventing the people's mouths is more important than blocking a river. If a river is blocked and collapses, many people will be hurt and the people are the same. Therefore, for the people, it is to prevent the people from opening their mouths to discuss the affairs of the court. This is even more serious than blocking the river and causing a flood. Therefore, the person who controls the flood must clear the river and let the water flow smoothly. The person who controls the people should also allow the people to speak freely." The monk with the iron rod nodded and looked at him again. He asked, "If you don't beat a drowning dog now, what are you waiting for? Is this also what the language of Guoyu says?" "I understand." The pondering expression on Zhao Yi's face disappeared and he suddenly smiled. He cupped his hands toward the window and said, "Thank you, Brother Li, for enlightening me. I understand." Chapter 708. Lin Yong squatted on the doorsill and said angrily, "Li brothers, do you think money means everything? Do you think you can do whatever you want just because you have money?" Li Yi glanced at the box under the bed, which contained the gold bars exchanged from the Bai, Ma, and Su families. He walked over, patted Lin Yong on the shoulder, sighed and said, "I don't think it's important to have money or not. It's good to live a simple and happy life. People shouldn't be too vain. Money isn't everything. Can money buy health? Can it buy happiness? No matter how much money you have, it's just a number. Take it easy. Even without money, life is still the same." Lin Yong nodded and said, "Li brothers, you're so insightful. That bullsh *T first prince wants to talk about the silver. What the hell is the silver? He just needs to pay the money to the authorities after killing people. Will the imperial court still give us ordinary people a way out?" When talking about this, Lin Yong became very emotional and clenched his fists tightly. If the first prince were in front of him, he would probably be strangled to death. Li Yi had discovered a long time ago that under Lin Yong's rugged appearance, he was actually a meticulous and nationalistic youth. He shook his head and said, "The person who came up with the silver for the silver is really vicious. He doesn't give ordinary people a way out at all. Life will be more and more difficult in the future. That's right. Lin Yong sighed and said, now there are rumors outside that the first prince's men were detained by the third prince this time because he wanted to carry out the *T silver for the Qi kingdom and not give ordinary people a way out. The third prince is really thinking for the people. This time he detained the first prince, and I'm afraid it's hard to explain to the imperial court. The third prince is wholeheartedly for the people, but unfortunately, alas, only when his subjects and people didn't always think about overthrowing him, but sincerely thought about him, would a successful ruler be able to wield power. In this aspect, Zhao Yi was much better than the first prince. When this news was spread out, not only the people of Feng province, but the entire Qi kingdom would also be grateful to him. It was like a pair of wings had been inserted into his already amazing life. On the other hand, even the relay station had been surrounded. The first prince, who could not even protect himself, should not have the energy or mind to do anything else, right? Although doing so would indirectly clear the obstacles for Zhao Yi, and would pose a greater threat to the Jing kingdom in the future, the threat posed by the first prince was more urgent and pressing. After all, if he wasn't busy, she would be busy. Tui? Silver of Judgment. Damn it. Do you want me to live? If the first prince were to become the emperor, we, the commoners, would really be doomed. Fortunately, the third prince is here. For us, he didn't hesitate to offend the first prince and so many officials in the capital city. It's our good fortune to be born in Feng province. These days, the city of Feng province was much livelier than usual. There were more and more people on the streets. Some were from Feng province, while others came from other places to see the shocking scene of more than 1,000 guards surrounding the relay station. When people looked over, they glared fiercely in a certain direction and spat on the ground. Since the news of the Silver of Judgment had spread, the first prince, Zhao Zheng, had become like a rat on the street in Feng province. Everyone wanted to beat him up. This influence was even spreading to further places. Many people surrounded the relay station and pointed at it. In a restaurant in the city, a slightly plump young man looked disdainful. He pointed at several people in front of him and said, "So what if my poem was plagiarized? Bite me. If you say one more word, I'll beat you to death. Have you heard about the Silver of Judgment? Let's calculate how much your lives are worth. Guess if you buy 10 at once, will you get 3 more for free?" Opposite him, several young men dressed like scholars involuntarily took a step back. When they thought of what he had just said, their faces turned pale. Trash. If you want to cause trouble next time, make it 13 at once. Chen Duo glanced at them. Did they really think that he was still the fat Chen Duo who had been wantonly bullied in the past? He waved his hand. How could these people take the initiative to cause trouble while he was drinking? He immediately lost all interest and turned to leave. Similarly, in the Feng province relay station, Zhao Zheng, who was facing a table of delicacies, was also not interested at all. The atmosphere in the relay station had been particularly oppressive these days. Although no one restricted his freedom, he would rather stay there when he thought of the situation outside. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. Damn it! Who was the one who leaked the news? Originally, everything had been going smoothly for him in Feng province. He had borrowed money, recorded accounts, investigated the accounts, and purged the officials of Feng province. With that secret manual in hand, he had already gained the upper hand. Alas, the news had leaked and the audacious Feng provincial governor had joined forces with Zhao Yi to surround this place. At this moment he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. All he could do now was wait for news from the capital. Zhao Zheng drank a cup of wine to drown his sorrows. He walked out of the door and gazed in a certain direction with an expectant look on his face. The capital of the Qi kingdom. The imperial court, which had never been solemn, was in a mess. Nearly 100 officials were standing in 2 camps. Their lips were trembling and their saliva was flying everywhere. It was as noisy as a market. The noise was so loud that it seemed as if the roof would be blown off. The method of borrowing money and keeping accounts is a great merit. Our Qi kingdom will be more stable if we can find a parasite. It will benefit the country and the people. We must implement it. The one who spoke was an imperial censor. His words were firm. His saliva flew past 2 officials and landed on the face of another official. Another official said in a deep voice, "Even so, we can't act rashly. The third prince's memorial is right. If we go overboard, it will cause more turbulence." *T. In my opinion, a bunch of nonsense. In my opinion, the disputes in the imperial court of the Qi kingdom had always been like this. It was not common for 2 third-ranked officials to scold each other. Here you could see third-ranked officials spitting saliva at each other and fourth-ranked assistant ministers scuffling in court. Fifth-ranked officials were not qualified to attend the imperial court under normal circumstances. The current dispute in the imperial court was about a memorial submitted by the provincial governor of Feng province. The memorial said that the first prince had accidentally obtained a wonderful method in Feng province. It could make all the corrupt officials disappear. This method had been verified in Feng province. The memorial first gave high praise to the first prince. Then it tactfully mentioned that this method seemed to have a small drawback. The court had been debating about this small drawback for several days. However, there was no conclusion. Urgent report from Feng province. Suddenly, a person rushed in from outside the hall. He took a few steps into the hall and shouted. The center of their dispute these days was Feng province. The voices in the imperial court stopped. At the head of the hall, a man wearing a dragon robe opened his eyes. His face was full of exhaustion. He looked at the noisy imperial court below and waved his hand. Read it. The man took out a memorial from his bosom and handed it over. In a loud voice, he said, His Highness Prince Heng urgently reports that His Highness Prince Feng has colluded with the provincial governor of Feng province. More than 1,000 Feng province garrison soldiers have imprisoned His Highness Prince Heng and more than 10 imperial censors in the capital at the relay station. As soon as he finished, the imperial court fell silent. Read it again. The man on the dragon throne slowly stood up. His Highness Prince Heng urgently reports that His Highness Prince Feng and the provincial governor of Feng province have colluded. They have imprisoned His Highness Prince Heng and more than 10 imperial censors in the capital in a relay station. They are plotting a rebellion. The man took out another memorial and respectfully handed it over. He continued, His Highness Prince Feng reports that the supervising imperial censors are acting recklessly. They intend to bring chaos to the foundation of the Qi kingdom and carry out a law of national subjugation. His Highness has already detained all the imperial censors and awaits Your Majesty's decision. After he finished speaking, not a single sound could be heard in the imperial court. The emperor of the Qi kingdom slowly sat back down. He pointed to the floor and said in a deep voice, Bring up the two memorials. Chapter 709. The two memorials were like two pails of ice water poured over one's head, completely extinguishing the heated atmosphere in the court. Prince Heng and Prince Feng were the first prince and third prince of the Qi kingdom respectively. One was the most respected eldest legitimate son, while the other was highly respected among the people and the imperial court. He was the most outstanding prince among the younger generation and was highly regarded by the emperor. Everyone knew that the next monarch of the Qi kingdom would be one of them. The Qi kingdom did not believe that the eldest legitimate son had the absolute right to inherit the throne. Regardless of whether it was the royal family or the aristocratic families, they all valued the ability first. It was also the will of the emperor to allow the first prince and the third prince to compete. The first prince's daily behavior was commendable. Although he did not make any great achievements, he did not make any big mistakes either. Compared to the exiled king of Shu in the Jing kingdom, he could be considered a very qualified first prince. Although the succession system of the eldest son of the first wife didn't really work in the kingdom of Qi, it was still somewhat biased. Being able to stay in the capital for a long period of time was King Heng's greatest advantage. If the other princes also performed mediocre, his throne wouldn't be threatened. Unfortunately, the third prince, Zhao Yi, was like a crane in a flock of chickens. Among the stars in the sky, he was the one that shone so brightly that it blinded people. He shone so brightly that the emperor and all the officials had no choice but to pay attention to him. When two tigers fought, one was bound to be injured. However, one of them lived in the capital while the other lived in Feng province. Although there were conflicts in the past, it was within the scope of the public's control. The third prince sent his soldiers to surround the courier station where the first prince and the dozen censors lived. This was a little too much. Your Majesty, Prince Feng is too presumptuous. He has defied his superiors by detaining his elder brother. The dozen censors of the censorate are also acting according to the imperial edict. May I know what Prince Feng's intention is? In the silence, someone finally stood up. The one who spoke was the vice minister of the imperial censorate. The vice minister of the imperial censorate was the second highest official in the censorate, second only to the imperial censor. In this kind of situation, the leader of the imperial censorate could not speak casually. The fact that more than 10 imperial censors had been detained was equivalent to a slap to their faces. Thus, even if the other party was the reputable third prince, someone had to stand up and speak. As soon as he finished speaking, an official stood up and asked, "Insubordination?" The memorials only mentioned that more than 10 imperial censors were temporarily detained, awaiting His Majesty's decision. How is this insubordination? The third prince was appreciated by many ministers in the imperial court. At a time like this, there would naturally be people on his side. The deputy minister of the imperial censor was speechless. What did he mean by temporarily detaining a dozen or so imperial censors? The eldest prince was a human, so were the imperial censors not human? More than a dozen imperial censors are supervising the provincial government and assessing the officials. They are acting on orders. King Feng has detained them for no reason. What is his motive? Didn't His Highness say that the supervising censor intends to carry out the law of subjugation and disrupt the foundation of the Qi kingdom? This is a serious matter, so it's normal for him to be a little more serious. What method of subjugation? Aren't you being too alarmist? Let's wait for His Majesty to finish reading before making a decision. In the imperial court, the third prince and the eldest prince each had their own supporters, and there had always been constant disputes between them. Due to the eldest prince's investigation of the accounts a few days ago, the situation had worsened. Whether it was intentional or not, the number of memorials to impeach the eldest prince suddenly increased. The eldest prince's actions along the way had been dug out one by one. For example, the eldest prince had allowed his subordinates to take advantage of a woman in a certain province or county, he had been biased in handling a certain case, he did not dress properly when meeting with officials, and he had damaged the dignity of the royal family. There was no lack of officials who had ulterior motives and wanted to obstruct the implementation of the law of subjugation. However, what they had said was the truth, and many of the court officials had already begun to criticize the eldest prince. Now that the dispute between the eldest prince and the third prince was involved, it was only natural that they would stand against him. Seeing that the court was in a heated argument again, the emperor of the Qi kingdom handed over a memorial. A eunuch immediately passed it to the two prime ministers who stood at the forefront of the court officials. After the two old men finished reading it, their beards trembled and their arms trembled slightly. They then passed the memorial to the people behind them. As the memorial was circulated, the noisy imperial court gradually quietened down. The emperor of the Qi kingdom remained calm and expressionless. When the imperial court had become extremely quiet, he finally waved his hand and said, "Everyone, please speak your opinions." An old man who stood at the forefront of the court officials stepped forward and said loudly, "Your Majesty, we can't use the silver of punishment as a precedent." An old man beside him also stepped forward and said, "His Royal Highness King Feng's memorial has already written very clearly. It lists the major crimes of the silver of punishment in detail. This method can't be used." Since the two prime ministers had spoken, the other people in the imperial court couldn't just stand by and watch. "Your Majesty, please reconsider. The silver of punishment should never be used. His Royal Highness King Feng is right. This will shake the foundation of the country." The deputy imperial censor and the imperial censor exchanged glances. The deputy imperial censor stepped forward and said solemnly, "The censorate had no prior knowledge of the actions of the supervising censors. The censorate will definitely punish these people who act on their own." There were some people who felt that the silver of punishment was extremely considerate. If it could be implemented, they could spend money to avoid disasters in the future. It was practically a life-saving weapon. The eldest prince really knew how to be considerate of others. Thoughts were just thoughts. With so many upright officials and important officials strongly opposing it, it wouldn't be surprising if the two prime ministers gave them a few slaps in the face if they dared to say the word good. They could only blame the third prince's memorial. The analysis of the flaws of the silver of punishment was so accurate that it drew blood on the first prick. He quoted from a wide range of sources and was brilliant in his writing. There was no way to refute him at all. Above, the man in dragon robes still looked calm, but he let out a long sigh in his heart. It had to be said that when he saw the word silver of punishment, he had also been tempted. Once this method was implemented, he would no longer have to worry about the national treasury running out of money. He would have an endless supply of financial support. Anything he wanted to do would have the financial support. However, he still had some misgivings. Once he opened his mouth, it would be difficult to stop it and would only cause more damage. He stood up and slowly said, "Urgent summon Prince Heng and Prince Feng back to the capital." The many days of dispute in the court had finally come to an end. The debate on the debit and credit method was not over, but it had been temporarily suppressed because there were more important matters that needed to be resolved first. The supervising censor did not have the guts to advocate this method. The eldest prince must have been behind this. Although this method could indeed solve the urgent problems of the national treasury, it was just as the third prince had said. This was a precondition of overdrawing the foundation of the country. If this continued, the country would no longer be a country. These two incidents happened to form a sharp contrast between the two princes. One was simple-minded and did not care about the consequences of his actions, while the other was meticulous and far-sighted. It was no wonder that they did not know. The contrast made everyone more aware that Prince Hung was far inferior to Prince Feng. This time, the significance of His Majesty summoning both of them to the capital was very different. The battle between the eldest prince and the third prince would affect the development of the Qi kingdom for a very long time in the future. If it had been someone else, perhaps it would have been a very different scene. Perhaps the situation in the court or even the entire Qi kingdom would undergo an earth-shattering change after a period of time. Li Yi swept his gaze across the counter and said, "The designs have to be flexible and varied. We can't always imitate others. We have to have the style of the Lin family. At first glance, people will know that these pieces of jewelry came from Fonglin Park." Lin Wanru nodded and said, "If we want to achieve this, I'm afraid it will not be possible in a short period of time. We have to do things step by step. We can't be too eager for quick success. Otherwise, things will only get worse and worse." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "For example, the eldest prince should look for the right path even if he lacks money. He's still too impatient to insist on carrying out something like discussing the silver for punishment. It's not advisable to advance rashly." He sighed and said, "Young people, it's very dangerous to have this kind of thinking." Chapter 7:10. Young man. Watching him walk out, Lin Wanru's lips curled into a rare smile. "Are you not a young man yourself?" She shook her head, and a strange feeling arose in her heart again. It had only been 2 months since they first met and became familiar with each other. In these 2 months, her impression and understanding of him had changed almost every day. His words and actions were sometimes steady and sometimes childish. It was difficult to understand him. The more time passed, the more she felt that he was shrouded in a mysterious veil, making it difficult for her to see through him. In these 2 months, something was different from before. Whether it was herself or Fonglin Yuan, they didn't notice or feel anything at first. But when they looked back, they realized that everything seemed to be very different. The Ma family, the Su family, and the Bai family no longer had business dealings with the Lin family. Because of these things, the family had been in a mess these 2 days, but she didn't care. The Lin family didn't need to rely on them anymore, and Fonglin Yuan was no longer the Fonglin Yuan of the past. She walked out of the door and looked at the shop with endless customers. She thought that it was time to open another shop. Although he looked like a scholar, he didn't seem to care much about these businessmen. He didn't look down on them or hate them. Now that he and his wife were here, they had to settle down and live, and they had to do something to make a living. She wondered if he would agree if she asked him to be the shopkeeper of the new shop. Speaking of him and that Miss Lu, there was something strange between them. The husband and wife lived in the same room, but slept in separate beds, separated by a curtain. It really didn't look like they were husband and wife. But if they weren't husband and wife, how could they? She couldn't figure out these things, but she felt that the current situation was not bad. If it could continue, she would probably be happy for a few more days. In the small courtyard, Li Yi filtered the medicine into a bowl and threw away the dregs. This was the last packet of medicine. When he returned to the kitchen to look for milk candy, he found that there was not even a bit left. He clearly remembered that there were a few pieces left last night. This time, he was afraid that he had forced himself on Mississippi Lu again. He shook his head and walked into the room with the bowl. Recently, he had been in contact with the brothels in Shuzhou, but there was no important news from them. However, after counting the days, they should be arriving soon. It would only be a few days, so he wasn't in a hurry. Li Yi walked into the house and put the bowl on the table. He glanced at Mississippi Lu and said, "There's no more White Rabbit creamy candies. Let's make do with it today. It's the last time anyway." Mississippi Lu sat by the table and raised her head slightly to look at him. She said, "It's almost healed. You don't need to drink anymore." Li Yi had heard her say this reason dozens of times. He picked up the bowl and said, "Drink it quickly. Don't you know that your body hasn't recovered yet?" "I'm not drinking." Ever since the first time he forced her to drink, she hadn't been so straightforward in a long time. "You don't want to drink?" Li Yi glanced at her, narrowed his eyes and said, "Then don't blame me for being impolite." He held the bowl in one hand and was about to pinch Mississippi Lu's chin with the other. He used to make her drink the medicine obediently like this. As soon as he raised his other hand, he felt a strange sensation on his chin. At the same time, the hand holding the bowl of medicine was slightly empty. "I haven't recovered yet. Don't you know?" Mississippi Lou asked while holding the bowl of medicine in one hand and pinching his chin with the other. I don't know. Li was stunned and shook his head. Well, if you don't want to drink it, then don't drink it. If you don't want to drink it, just leave it there. I have something to do outside. I'll come back later and pour it away. He wanted to turn around and leave, but his body couldn't even move. At the Fengzhou station, Zhao Jing looked at the guard at the door and asked lightly, Why? Can't I go out? The guard quickly bowed and said, Of course your highness can go out at will, but... He looked at a young man behind Zhao Zheng and said, He can't. The provincial governor has ordered that no one can go in or out at will except your highness. I can't even bring guards with me when I go out? Zhao Jing looked at him and questioned, If something happens to I, who will bear the responsibility? He pointed at the two guards and asked, You or you? The two guards' expressions changed and immediately took 2 steps back. Let's go. Zhao Jing snorted coldly. The young man and a dozen guards walked out of the station. No one stopped them. Although the provincial governor had said that no one could go in or out at will except for the first prince, they didn't dare to let the first prince go out alone. If something happened to the first prince in Fengzhou, the provincial governor and the third prince wouldn't be able to escape the blame, let alone them. It would be fine as long as the imperial censors were inside. This was the provincial governor's real intention. After leaving the station, the young man followed closely behind Zhao Zheng and asked, Cousin, are we going back to the capital? Doesn't this mean that we admit defeat? Zhao Jing turned around and looked at him coldly. The young man's expression changed and he immediately said, I'm sorry, your highness. Hurry up. The news from the capital should arrive soon. Zhao Jing turned around and spat out one word through clenched teeth, Wait. Although no one restricted his freedom, he couldn't do anything without those people. At this moment he felt a little regretful. He was too impatient. If he hadn't been so impulsive and gone back to the capital to discuss it with his father, things wouldn't have developed to this point. Now that things had developed to this point, all he could do was wait. On the second floor of a tea house opposite the station, Money God of Fortune personally poured tea for the two people at the table by the window and then left respectfully. The provincial governor of Fengzhou looked at the young man opposite him and said, Your Highness, the news from the capital should arrive in 2 days. Zhao Yi withdrew his gaze from below and said, This time, I'm afraid that I will have to go to the capital. Fengzhou will be handed over to Provincial Governor Zhou. The provincial governor of Fengzhou cupped his hands and said, It's my duty. How's the investigation going? Zhao Yi nodded and suddenly asked. The provincial governor of Fengzhou thought for a moment and said, That woman is the eldest daughter of the Lin family in Fengzhou. The Lin family has run a jewelry business in Fengzhou for decades. As for the person you mentioned, he should also be a member of the Lin family. We are still investigating secretly. Before the provincial governor of Fengzhou finished his words, there was a sudden sound of hurried footsteps coming from the stairs. A person rushed up the stairs and said anxiously, Your Highness, urgent news from the capital. Li Yi moved his chin, threw a white rabbit creamy candy into his mouth, and walked out of Fenglin Garden. He took the white rabbit creamy candy from Lin Wanru's room. It turned out that this was the feeling of being pinched and fed medicine by someone. Mississippi Lou was indeed not the Mississippi Lou of the past. If it were a few months ago, she would definitely hold a sword and cut herself into 8 pieces after being fed medicine by the tyrant so many times. Although he didn't use his full strength because he was worried that Mississippi Lou's old injury would relapse, he was now a little master, but he still couldn't resist Mississippi Lou. It seemed that she had almost recovered. He licked his lips and still tasted a little bitter. He peeled another candy and threw it into his mouth. When he was about to step into the courtyard, a slightly trembling voice came from behind him. Young Master. Chapter 7:11. Young Master. Hearing this voice, Li Yi stopped in his tracks. He fiercely chewed the white rabbit creamy candy in his mouth and swallowed it. He turned around and saw 3 figures standing in front of him. Fang's body trembled slightly from a distance of 3 meters. Although the face in front of him was unfamiliar, he had seen the portrait in Shuzhou. Moreover, the figure and temperament of the person in front of him were so familiar. How could he forget? Uncle. Yang Liuqing walked forward and bowed slightly. She was no longer the young girl from a year ago. She had an outstanding temperament and stood there like an unsheathed sword. County Marquis Li, how have you been? The middle-aged Taoist in a loose Taoist robe bowed to him and said with a smile. He stood there casually as if he was one with the surrounding heaven and earth. Li Yi's gaze stayed on the 3 for a long time, then he turned around and opened the courtyard door. Young Master, where's second miss? Didn't you say you were together? Fang looked at him and asked eagerly as soon as he closed the courtyard door. Li didn't answer. He first looked at him and asked, "How's Rui? How's the situation at home?" Fang smiled and said, "Mrs. Fine. Everything at home is also fine. They are all waiting for you to return." As soon as he finished speaking, Mississippi Lu walked out of the room. Yang Liuqing quickly walked over and bowed, "Master." Mississippi Lu looked at her and suddenly reached out to grab her shoulder. Yang Liuqing's body shook and she subconsciously stepped back to dodge, but she couldn't break free in the end. Mississippi Lu patted her on the shoulder and nodded, "Not bad. You didn't forget your martial arts." A figure suddenly flew out from one of the windows of the inn to the side. The sloppy old man landed steadily in the courtyard and stood beside Li Yi. He looked at the middle-aged Taoist warily and asked, "Old Taoist Yuan, why aren't you cultivating? What are you doing here?" A hint of surprise also appeared on the middle-aged Taoist priest's face as he asked, "Strange Su, why are you here when you're not in the Wu Kingdom?" Li Yi turned to look at the sloppy old man and asked, "Do you know each other?" The middle-aged Taoist said, "I met him once when I was traveling around various countries in my early years." The sloppy old man snorted coldly and said, "In this world, apart from these ox-nosed Taoists, who else can practice the art of retaining one's appearance to such a level? When I saw him 30 years ago he looked like this. I don't know if his martial arts have improved in the past 30 years, but his appearance has not improved at all." Li looked at the two and waved his hand. "We're all on the same side. Sit down and talk." Fang gulped down a bowl of water and said, "We just arrived in Shu province 2 days ago. I heard that young master and second miss are in the Qi kingdom, so we came here without delay. The others are now outside the city and can enter at any time. Young master, when are we leaving?" "There's no hurry." Li Yi turned to look at the Taoist priest and thought that he should be about the same age as Strange Su, but he seemed to be dozens of years older. Li Yi suppressed the strange feeling in his heart and asked, "This Taoist priest? By the order of His Majesty, I'm here to take County Marquis Li back," the Taoist priest surnamed Yuan said with a smile. Li Yi was stunned for a moment and asked, "When did you become a county marquis?" "On the day County Marquis Li left the capital." The Taoist priest looked at him and said, "When are we leaving?" "In 2 days." Li Yi thought for a while and turned to look in a certain direction. He said, "I didn't say hello when I came here. Before I leave I have to say goodbye." Lin Yong leaned against the door of Fanglin Garden and looked at the closed door again. He shook his head and murmured, "It's almost time for dinner. Why did they close the door?" "In the government office of Feng Province. As your highness expected, His Majesty has summoned your highness and the great prince back to the capital. Even the supervising imperial censor has returned with them. According to the messenger just now, almost all the officials in the court are on your highness's side. There are countless memorials to impeach the great prince. There are also many voices among the people. This time the situation is very favorable for us." The provincial governor of Feng Province said to Zhao Yi with a smile, "We can't set a precedent for discussing crimes. Unless Father directly directs this matter, once it is discussed openly, the loyal officials in the capital will not agree." Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, "Since there is news from the capital, withdraw all the guards outside the relay station." The provincial governor of Feng Province bowed and said, "I will arrange it immediately." Zhao Yi let out a sigh of relief and looked out of the window out of habit. Ever since he made a name for himself in the Qi kingdom, the conflict between him and the great prince had been escalating. At first he only wanted to govern Feng Province well and didn't want to fight for anything. Later some things happened and he almost lost his life several times. Only then did he gradually realize that fighting for a way out could he fight for a way out. If he didn't fight he would die sooner or later. From being pushed down this path to where he was today, there was no turning back. Half a month ago or even a few days ago, he didn't think that the great prince's visit to Feng Province would turn out like this. In just a few short days he went from being passive to having the upper hand. The change was so big that even he didn't expect it. Zhao Yi slowly sighed and said, "Brother Li, since you have done so much, why aren't you willing to come out and see me?" When the provincial governor of Feng Province walked out of the door, an official came up to him. The official cupped his hands and bowed before saying, "Lord Zhou, I have investigated the person you asked me to. 2 months ago the Lin family's caravan went to the Jing kingdom and brought back 2 people from the Jing kingdom. The man's name is Li Xian. He is now the Lin family's accountant." Zhao Yi walked out of the room and looked at him as he asked, "What did you say? The Jing kingdom's Li Xian?" "Your Highness." The official was about to bow when Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, "Repeat what you just said." "Yes." The official said again, the young man and woman were saved by the Lin family's caravan from the Jing kingdom when they passed by Shu province. The man's name is Li Xian. Shu province is Li Xian? Yes, I understand. A smile appeared on Zhao Yi's face as he strode towards the exit. The group of guards followed closely behind him. Fonglin Court. Zhao Yi stood in front of a shop in the city. He looked at the signboard above and murmured, as expected. Someone behind him said, Your Highness, this is one of the Lin family's shops in Feng province. There are 2 other shops like this. The middle-aged scholar next to Zhao Yi waved his fan and said, Your Highness, are we going to the Lin family now? Zhao Yi shook his head and said, How can we be so hasty? Let's go back to the imperial residence first. Your Highness, someone just delivered an invitation card. In King Feng's residence, the housekeeper presented an invitation card to Zhao Yi as soon as he returned. Who sent it? In the study room, Zhao Yi was holding a pen and writing. He asked casually. I don't know. It was inserted into the residence's door with a dagger, the housekeeper replied with a bow. Recently, the imperial residence had encountered a series of strange things. It was not the first time a dagger had been used to deliver a letter. Sending an invitation card was nothing to be alarmed about. A dagger? Zhao Yi paused and waved his hand. Give it to me. He took the invitation card from the housekeeper and read it carefully. He crumpled the written invitation card into a ball and said with a smile, Get ready. I will be leaving soon. Chapter 7:12. Young master, I'll go with you. If there's a fight later, I'll have one more helper. Fang stood in the yard, eager to have a go. He had been depressed for a few months. Now that he could finally relax, his true nature was immediately exposed. You can wait downstairs with some people. Li Yi waved his hand. This was a gay meet-up, not a fight. It was impolite to bring so many people. It would be bad if they misunderstood. 2 grandmasters were enough. Okay. Fang nodded and said, Then I'll tell them to enter the city first. In order to avoid trouble, Li Yi actually didn't plan to see Zhao Yi. But that was then and this was now. There were Taoist Yuan and Su on his left and right, so he had to be confident. The yard door opened. At the entrance of Fonglin Garden, Lin Yang's body was shocked and he immediately walked over. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Brother Lin, which is the most famous restaurant in Feng State City? Restaurant? Lin Yong was stunned and said, Why go to a restaurant? We can eat at home. It'll be a waste to eat outside. The Qian family restaurant was the largest and most luxurious restaurant in Feng State. Although the name was a bit tacky to be able to name their own bank, they didn't expect them to give the restaurant an elegant name. The name was tacky, but the decorations, dishes and prices inside were not ordinary at all. This restaurant was not open to ordinary people. Those who could enter were either rich, powerful, or rich and powerful. As for those who had neither money nor power but could eat and drink to their heart's content and leave without paying, they were either the manager of the restaurant or the son of the manager of the restaurant. Qian Duo belonged to the latter. Because he had used 10,000 taels of silver to buy poems, he was fined a month's allowance. Now he was penniless. He could only go to his own brothel and eat in his own restaurant. His life. In fact, there was not much difference from before. The only depressing thing was that he didn't know which big mouth had leaked the news of him buying poems. Now the entire Feng province knew that he had bought those poems. The 10,000 taels of silver had only made a splash. It was far from achieving the effect he wanted. It was a bit of a waste of money. The most likely suspects were the one surnamed Yang and the one surnamed Zhao. He did not suspect the brother who sold the poem. If that was the case, he would definitely reveal the author of the poem. The other party's price was fair and he was honest with both the old and the young. However, he still owed him a copper coin and had not returned it yet. Qian Duo sighed. The poems were good, but he was too impatient. If he had released them step by step, he wouldn't have today. Seeing that there were guests coming in, the waiter of the restaurant immediately walked over and asked, Sir, do you have a reservation? The 3 people who came in looked a bit strange. One was a young man, one was a middle-aged Taoist, and the last one was a sloppy old man. The young man looked around and asked, There are no guests here. Do I need to make a reservation? If you want to eat, I recommend you to go to the restaurant across the street. The waiter smiled and said, You must have a reservation to eat here. In fact, reservations were just a way of saying it to the outside world. Feng State City wasn't big. The waiter knew very well who needed to make a reservation and who didn't. I'm leaving. Ask them to make the same thing for lunch. Qian Duo tore a chicken leg, stood up and walked out of the door. The waiter quickly said, Yes, young master. Li looked at the slightly fat young man and said, Chen Duo Duo? Chen Duo Duo turned his head and looked at him. He frowned and asked, Do I know you? Li looked at him and said with a smile, Sorry, I still don't have change today. I'll give you the money back next time. Chen Duo's eyes suddenly widened when he heard this. His whole body trembled and he blurted out, You are that brother. Chen Duo Duo stood at the door of the most luxurious private room in the Chen family restaurant and said to the waiter behind him, What are you waiting for? Hurry up and give us all the signature dishes here. Yes, young master. I'll ask someone to do it right away. The waiter responded and hurried downstairs. Chen Duo Duo looked at the young man in front of him. Although he had traded with him twice, he had never seen his appearance. At this time, it was inevitable that he had a strange feeling in his heart. Brother, what else do you want to eat? I'll ask someone to arrange it right away. Although it was strange, his eagerness and enthusiasm didn't diminish at all. After all, the next time he had pocket money he was going to buy a few hundred poems. This time he would buy cheap ones. He wanted to win by quantity. How could he not shut those people's mouths? There's no need. Li shook his head and said, I'll meet a friend here in a while. I'll leave soon. He had some doubts about the reliability of Lin Yong's recommendation of this restaurant. There wasn't a single customer. It didn't look like the best restaurant in Fengzhou City. Don't worry. You go first. Chen Duo Duo smiled, closed the door and left. Even if 100 poems were worth 100 taels of silver, it would still cost 10,000 taels of silver. He needed time to prepare. The opportunity was rare. If he missed it this time, he didn't know when he would encounter it again. When he walked down the stairs, there were several figures coming in from outside. Dad. Chen Duo Duo walked over and looked at the god of fortune in the crowd. He asked in surprise, Dad, why are you here? Shut up. Chen Duo Duo glared at him and asked, Is there any guest in the restaurant now? Who are they? No. Chen Duo Duo shook his head at first. Then he seemed to have thought of something and said, There is a friend of mine upstairs. As soon as Chen Duo Duo finished speaking, a door opened upstairs. A young man walked out and looked down. He smiled and said, I've been waiting for His Royal Highness King Feng for a long time. Chen Duo Duo scratched his head and said in surprise, Not much. I just arrived and the dishes haven't been served yet. Dad, why did you hit me? Chen Duo Duo covered his head and looked at the god of fortune with some resentment. Chen Duo Duo glanced at the top of the stairs and pulled his arm to the side. Tell me, how do you know the person upstairs? In the private room, after Zhao Yi sat down, he looked at Li Yi with a hint of doubt on his face. He asked, Brother Li, why are you? Li Yi reached behind his ear with one hand and gently tore off the mask. There's actually such a strange thing in the world. Zhao Yi looked at the thin mask in Li Yi's hand with a hint of surprise on his face. Then he looked at Li Yi and said, Brother Li, since you've arrived in Feng Province, why are you only now? Li Yi waved his hand and said, It's a long story. After a while, Zhao Yi had a look of realization on his face. He said, The holy religion does have a huge influence in the Qi kingdom. They are very well hidden and we don't know what they're planning. They're a big problem for the imperial court. But don't worry, Brother Li. No matter how long their hands are, they can't reach Feng Province. It doesn't matter anymore, Li Yi said as he shook his head. If he really met the Taoist nun now, it was uncertain who would kidnap who. Zhao Yi looked at him and asked, The person who sent the message to the prince's mansion 2 days ago should have been arranged by Brother Li, right? As he spoke, he turned his head and looked at the sloppy old man who was sitting to the side and eating a chicken leg. The sloppy old man didn't even raise his head as he focused on eating the chicken leg in his hand. It's a small matter, a small matter. Li didn't deny it. He looked at him and pointed at the dishes on the table, saying, I still owe you a meal. Let's pay it off today. It's a small matter for Brother Li, but it's not for me. Zhao Yi cupped his hands in obeisance and said, This time I owe Brother Li a favor. I'll definitely pay it back in the future if I have the chance. Don't worry about the future. Li raised his wine cup and looked at him, saying, Now is fine too. Zhao Yi raised his head and looked at him in surprise. He asked, Brother Li, you mean? Li looked at him and said, There's no time like the present. Let's do it today. Chapter 7:13. After listening to him, Zhao Yi's expression changed slightly. He asked, Brother Li, you're leaving? Li nodded and said, I've been away from home for too long. It's time for me to go back. Zhao Yi was silent for a while and said, Don't worry and leave. I'll help take care of the Lin family. However, Brother Li, you have to think this through. Zhao Yi's favor is far more than this. One can't be too greedy. If I wanted tens of millions of liang of silver in Fengzhou, you wouldn't give it to me, would you? Li smiled and raised his head. He waved his hand at the people behind Zhao Yi and said, "Come, Brother Xiuwen, Brother Yanzhou, don't just stand there. Sit down and eat." Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen glanced at Zhao Yi. Seeing him nod, they sat on either side of him. A few days ago, the poems that were circulating in Fengzhou were written by Brother Li, right? Ever since Li Yi appeared, Zhao Xiuwen's gaze rarely left his face. After he sat down, this was the first thing he asked. Li Yi waved his hand and denied. It was written by Brother Qian. Business was all about integrity. Money and goods were cleared. Those poems had nothing to do with him now that they were out of his hands. In fact, they had nothing to do with him in the first place. After Zhao Xiuwen asked that question, he realized he had asked a pointless question. Since he had seen him here, there was no need to argue about who the poems belonged to. Li Yi ate 2 mouthfuls of food and looked at Yang Yanzhou with some surprise. He asked, "When did the foremost scholar of Qing and Prefecture come to the Qi kingdom?" In front of Brother Li, it's best not to mention anything about being the foremost scholar. Yang Yanzhou smiled and said, "Besides, Yanzhou was born in the Qi kingdom and grew up in the Qi kingdom. I'm just returning home from a faraway trip." Li Yi nodded and looked at Zhao Yi. "Oh right, I didn't cause any trouble for His Highness this time, did I?" Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "If this is considered trouble, then the more trouble the better. If one were to look at the entire Qi kingdom, the debit and credit method and the matter of the guilty silver were indeed like 2 huge stones thrown into a calm lake, stirring up quite a storm. This storm did not only exist in Feng province and the capital. It was now spreading to even more places. Moreover, the effects of these 2 incidents were far less significant. Although the waves had calmed, the undercurrents at the bottom of the lake had been thrown into even greater disarray by these 2 boulders. It was still unknown what the outcome of this trip to the capital would be. Zhao Yi raised his head and looked at the opposite side. The source of all these things was that he had casually done something in Fengzhou City. Although this matter would be of great help to him, a person who could single-handedly cause chaos in a country was truly terrifying. With the help of such a person, a mere country would be nothing. One day he might even become the ruler of the world. Li looked up at Zhao Yi and said, "Brother Zhao, why are you still in a daze? Let's eat." At the entrance of the Chen family's restaurant, Li cupped his hands in obeisance to Zhao Yi and said, "After this farewell, I don't know when we will meet again. Brother Zhao, take care." Zhao Yi also cupped his hands in obeisance. "Brother Li, take care." Chen Duo, who was behind the crowd, was firmly held down by the money god. As he watched the figure disappear, he became dejected. In front of them, Yang Yanzhou withdrew his gaze and asked, "Your Highness, why didn't you keep him?" "We couldn't keep him." Behind Zhao Yi, the middle-aged scholar breathed a sigh of relief and sighed. "Even His Majesty doesn't have such a grand entourage to accompany and protect him. How could we keep him?" Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "How can forcing him to stay be better than being willing?" Yang Yanzhou said, "Given his character, how could he stay in the Qi kingdom willingly?" Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "Early this morning I received a messenger from Jingdou on horseback. The emperor of the Jing kingdom hasn't been to court for half a month." Yang Yanzhou was stunned and asked, "Is the Jing kingdom going to change?" Zhao Yi nodded and said, "I'm afraid it's going to happen soon." Yang Yanzhou thought for a moment and said, "But we haven't gotten the divine punishment yet. The Qi kingdom hasn't been decided yet. It's too early. Even if we get the secret recipe, I'm afraid there will be more trouble." Zhao Yi looked back at the money god and said, "Do you know the Lin family in Feng province?" Money god was confused and said, "There are many Lin family in Feng province. Which one are you talking about, Your Highness?" Zhao Yi thought for a moment and said, "It seems to be a jewelry business." Money god scratched his head and said, "I seem to have a little impression of it. Do you want to pack your things when you go back in case it's too late to leave?" This was the 3rd time the sloppy old man had asked in a roundabout way. Li Yi tilted his head to look at him and said, "I'm sure. We'll leave tomorrow. So if you have any other questions, just ask them now." The sloppy old man waved his hand and said, "I'm just asking casually. There's nothing urgent. It won't be too late to postpone it for another 2 days. Then postpone it for another day." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Tomorrow is a little rushed. It's not easy to go if it's too late. It's better to set off in the morning the day after tomorrow." The sloppy old man was stunned and said, "It doesn't matter if we travel at night. We're all people in the martial arts world. It's normal to travel at night. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter?" "It really doesn't matter. sitting in the yard, Lin Yong looked into the kitchen and asked, "Li brothers, who were those people who came here just now?" Li did not answer. He brought out several dishes from the kitchen one after another. After the last soup was out of the pot, he sat down opposite Lin Yong and said, "Eat it. There's still one more in the kitchen. When you go there later, give it to Miss Lin." Lin Yong looked at the food on the table. The fragrance assailed his nostrils. He swallowed his saliva and looked at Li Yi. He asked, "What day is it today? Why is it so sumptuous?" Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Eat it." Lin Yong looked at him and asked, "Don't you want to send one to Miss Lu?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "She's out. She won't eat at home today." Lin Yong looked around and asked, "Where's the old man?" "Let's eat. Don't talk so much nonsense." Li Yi glanced at him, picked up the chopsticks and ate by himself. Lin Yong said as he filled a bowl of soup for himself, "To be honest, Li brothers, I've never seen a man cook so well. I've never seen a woman cook so well. I can't even eat the food that my husband cooks now. And my miss doesn't know how to cook at all. I'm thinking, a woman who can't even cook, who will marry her in the future." Ahem. Li Yi coughed softly. "What's wrong? Are you choking?" Lin Yong raised his head to look at him, then scooped another bowl of soup for himself. Pressing down on the small mountain of soup in the bowl, he said, "Eat slowly, I won't fight with you over it." "Right, where were we just now?" Li Yi reminded him, "We were talking about your husband's cooking is not good." "No, I think we were talking about my Mississippi." Lin Yong shook his head and said, "My miss is not like a woman at all. Not to mention that she can't cook, she's so powerful. Everyone in the Lin family is not afraid of her. In my opinion, women can't be too powerful. If they are too powerful, they won't be able to marry no matter how beautiful they are." Ahem. Li Yi coughed again. "I told you to eat slowly. Come, have some soup." "Oh, there's no more soup." Lin Yong waved his hand and said, "In fact, without Miss Lu, I think you and my miss are the best match. Miss will do the work of earning money and supporting the family. You can live off a woman at home. No, you can cook at home and recite poems. Miss also likes these things." "That's great. I won't worry about her marriage." Lin Wanru stood behind him and said apologetically, "I've made you worry." Lin Yong looked back and said, "We're family. Don't be so polite. I've watched you grow up." Then he looked back at Li Yi and said, "Li brothers, what did you say just now? You're going out to find Miss Lu for dinner, right?" "I'll go right away." Before he finished speaking, he had already put down his chopsticks and strode outside. Li Yi made a helpless gesture and said, "You know, he's like this. Don't mind him. He's been so outspoken for so many years. I'm used to it." Lin Wanru nodded and looked at him and said, "Tomorrow morning the Lin family will hold a banquet. The shopkeepers of several shops and people from the business will go. Remember to come." Li nodded and said, "Got it. I'll ask Brother Lin to pick you up tomorrow." Lin Wanru said and turned to leave. When she reached the door, she turned back. "Is there anything else?" Li looked at her and asked. Lin Wanru pointed to the kitchen and said, "These are my dishes. Bring them there yourself." Chapter 7:14. Although the Lin family was not as rich as the Chen family in Fengzhou, and there were hundreds of shopkeepers in the shops under their name, the number of people in the shops was not small, including the members of the small chamber of commerce led by the Lin family. Every 6 months, the Lin family would gather these people together. Firstly, it was to connect with each other, and secondly, it was to evaluate their achievements. Based on this, they would reward or punish them. Occasionally, they would also make some changes in personnel. Although the accounts of the Lin family were personally handled by Lin Wanru, as the accountant, Li Yi naturally had the right to participate in this meeting. Apart from the 2 days he stayed here at the beginning, this was the second time he came to the Lin family. Today the Lin family was very lively. Li Yi did not know many members of the Lin family, and now there were many new faces. He had never been interested in such a banquet. Yesterday he just did not think about how to bid farewell to Lin Wanru, so he agreed to it. In fact, he still had not thought about it. If it was just a relationship of using each other from the beginning, there was nothing to worry about. Leaving a letter was enough, and there was no need for any explanation. Any explanation would be an explanation for the previous deception, and it would be difficult to say it. After all, he was shy and embarrassed. Lin Wanru was now the real master of the Lin family, and everyone was afraid of her. Naturally, there were many social engagements this morning. Li saw her walking back and forth a few times, but he only nodded or smiled slightly. He did not even have time to speak. There were quite a few people who glanced at him or stopped at him. Occasionally he could hear some gossip. For example, What was the relationship between this accountant and the young lady of the Lin family? Could it be that he was keeping a gigolo outside? It was really unusual for the young lady of the Lin family to be unmarried at this age. She was as pretty as a flower and had an exquisite figure. This gigolo had gotten a bargain. Li reached out and touched his face. These days he was busy and did not have much time to bask in the sun. Maybe his face was a little pale, but it did not matter. It would be back to black after a month of basking in the sun. He really missed the small courtyard and the rocking chair at home. Lin Yong kicked over the stool of someone who was gossiping and sat opposite Li. He said, "I hate these people who gossip behind people's backs the most. What's the use of talking behind people's backs? Do you have the guts to say it in front of the young lady?" Lin Yong glanced at Lin Wanru, who was surrounded by countless people not far away. He picked up a pot of tea from the table and gulped it down. Only then did he wipe his mouth and say, "Miss plans to open a new shop. She will announce it today." These people are all thinking about opening a new shop. They are simply dreaming. Miss already has plans. They are all wasting their efforts. Li Yong of Lin and asked Cass Lin's Lin. "Of course it is to be a shopkeeper." Lin Yong looked at him and said, "Being a shopkeeper has a lot of money. Everyone knows this. That shop used to be managed by the second master. That's why he could be so greedy, but they are thinking in vain this time." Lin Yong looked at him and said mysteriously, "You will know in a while. Miss is like a tigress at home. No one dares to say a word when she roars. This matter should be settled." Ahem. Li coughed lightly. He picked up the teacup and moistened his lips. Lin Yong glanced at the teacup on the table. He stood up naturally and said, "The tea is cold. I will go and heat it up." He stood up, picked up the teapot and walked straight ahead. Lin Wanru sat down where he had been sitting. Her expression was rather helpless. "Tired?" Li pushed a fruit platter over and asked. Lin Wanru said, "It's been like this for the past few years. It's good to get used to it. There's no end to business and there's no end to earning money." Li shook his head and said, "There are still many things to do in life. This kind of life is so boring. But if I don't do business, I don't know what I should do." Lin Wanru shook her head. When she looked at him again, she said, "There is something." She was only halfway through her sentence when there was a sudden commotion in front of her. Lin Wanru looked back and said, "I will go and take a look first." Li nodded. Before Lin Wanru could walk over, a group of people walked over to her side. A man's expression was a little anxious. As he walked, he looked at the three people in front of him and said, "Shopkeeper Ma, Shopkeeper Su, Nephew Bai, if there is anything we can discuss it. Why did you break it off just like that?" Shopkeeper Ma sneered and said, "You will have to ask Wanru about this. The Ma family and the Lin family have been working together for so many years, but in the end the Lin family treated us like this. It's really chilling." The man saw Lin Wanru and hurriedly walked over and said, "Wanru, do you have some misunderstanding with Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su? Shopkeepers, why are you here?" Lin Wanru looked at the two people and asked calmly. The man immediately said, "I invited the two shopkeepers to come here. It's such a big thing, but you didn't discuss it with your family. It's simply outrageous. Without these three shops, where will we get the raw materials in the future?" Lin Wanru looked at the man and said, "Third uncle, I have my own arrangements for this matter." "What arrangements?" The man frowned and said, "If there is any misunderstanding with Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su, quickly apologize. The Lin family still needs to cooperate with them in the future. Nephew Bai is one of us, we will talk about it in detail later. Third uncle, I know what to do with the Lin family. You don't need to worry about this matter." "What do you mean you know what to do?" The man's face showed anger and said, "Is the Lin family your Lin family or our Lin family? Do you really want to squander the great Lin family?" He didn't deliberately suppress his voice, and this sentence was heard by almost everyone present. Today was a grand event of the Lin family. In addition to the members of the Lin family, the shopkeepers, stewards and other management personnel were gathered here. They could be considered the backbone of the entire Lin family. The scene in front of them made them a little confused and surprised. They didn't know why the third master was so angry. The third master of the Lin family pointed at Lin Wanru and said loudly, you tell me for the past decades the Lin family's supplies have been provided by the Ma family, the Su family and the Bai family. Now she just said that she will stop. Where will the Lin family get supplies in the future? We will hand over the Lin family to you, not to let you mess around." The Lin family had actually heard about the cessation of cooperation with the Ma family, the Su family, and the Bai family these days. But on the one hand the shop was operating normally, and on the other hand, the monthly distribution of money to them didn't decrease but increased. Who would go against the money and offend this strong woman? Their third uncle throwing such a big tantrum today made them feel somewhat baffled. The last person who talked to her like this was her second uncle, who was originally the second in the Lin family. Now he didn't even attend such an important event. For a moment, everyone was confused. What was wrong with the third uncle today? Lin Wanru looked at the third uncle of the Lin family in front of her, and then looked at the three people next to him. She looked back and asked, "Third uncle, have you finished? What's with your attitude?" The third master of the Lin family's face turned red and said, "You're rebelling. If the Lin family continues to be tormented by you like this, sooner or later it will be over." After saying this, no one responded. The third master of the Lin family looked a little embarrassed, and his eyes vaguely glanced in a few directions. Finally, someone stood up and said, "I think third brother is right. We have been cooperating with these families for so many years. How can we just stop? How can we do business in the future?" Another person responded, "Yes, Wanru, this matter concerns the entire Lin family. You can't make the decision alone." Lin Wanru looked at them. She had seen this kind of situation countless times, but they had long been used to lying at home and taking money, so they would just say it. This time, third uncle was probably looking for the wrong person again. Shopkeeper Ma waved his sleeves and said, "If it weren't for the many years of friendship with the Lin family, I wouldn't have come today." "Shopkeeper Ma, don't be angry, don't be angry." The third master of the Lin family tried to persuade him. He hurriedly gave Lin Wanru a look and said, "What are you waiting for, Wanru? Apologize to Shopkeeper Ma quickly." Shopkeeper Su also frowned and said, "If the Lin family can't give us a satisfactory explanation for this matter, we'd better go our separate ways in the future." Lin Wanru reached out to the door and said, "Then please." Chapter 7:15. Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su were taken aback when they heard that. Their faces instantly turned ugly. Shopkeeper Ma smiled coldly and said, "Third Master Lin, you saw it too. It's not that we don't want to give you face. Your Lin family really has produced a powerful person," Shopkeeper Su said in a strange tone. He turned around and said, "Let's go." He and Shopkeeper Ma turned around and left. Bai Yu looked at Third Master Lin, then at Lin Wanru, and also turned around to leave. "Let's hold a family meeting." Third Master Lin looked around and said to the Lin family members, "It's time to choose someone who truly thinks for the Lin family." The family meeting was not an ordinary meeting. It was only held when it involved important matters, such as the renegotiation of the person in charge of the Lin family's business. The Lin family's attention was not on Third Master Lin, but on what was behind him. Shopkeeper Ma and the others did not leave, not because they did not want to, but because the door was blocked. Although it was not the main door of the Lin family, it was still quite spacious. If two fat men stood there, it would still be a little crowded. Before Shopkeeper Ma could say, "Move aside," he shivered and held back his words. He smiled and said, "Shopkeeper Chen, please, please." Shopkeeper Su and Bai Yu quickly moved aside. Others might not recognize the god of fortune money, but as businessmen, how could they not recognize him? After moving aside hurriedly, they were confused. Today was the Lin family's family banquet. What was the famous god of fortune money doing here? However, the god of fortune money did not care about the three of them. He straightened his belly and walked straight inside. So fast. Li Yi, who was eating melon seeds nearby, stood up and murmured. Third uncle of the Lin family turned around and looked at the familiar yet strange fat man with a puzzled expression. Lin Wanru was surprised for a moment. She stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Welcome, Shopkeeper Chen. Please forgive me for not going out to meet you. You are Lin." The god of fortune money straightened his belly and looked at him. Halfway through his sentence, he saw a figure sitting in front of him. He immediately bent down and asked, "You are Miss Lin Wanru, right?" "Yes." Lin Wanru nodded. She suppressed her doubts and asked, "What brings you here, god of fortune money?" Only then did everyone realize that the person in front of them was the famous fortune god of money. Their expressions changed instantly. The name Fortune God of Money was like a myth in the hearts of the merchants in Feng Province. The minds of Shopkeeper Ma and the other two were still in a mess. Hearing the name of the God of Wealth, Third Master Lin stood rooted to the ground. He felt like his tongue was tied and he couldn't move a single step. "Just call me Shopkeeper Chen, don't stand on ceremony, Miss Lin." "You are welcome, Miss Lin." The God of Fortune Money waved his hand and said, "I have a business to discuss with Miss Lin this time. Is it convenient now?" As soon as the God of Fortune Money said this, not only Lin Wanru, but also shopkeeper Ma and the others could not believe their ears. Who else in Feng State had such great airs to let the god of fortune money come to talk business in person? When they thought about it more deeply, their faces began to turn pale and their hearts became anxious. Even the god of fortune money came to visit in person. Was the Lin family still the Lin family they were familiar with? Lin Wanru was also surprised. Strange things had happened one after another these days. First, there were foreign businessmen seeking cooperation, and then the Chen family, a giant businessman, came to visit. Was the Lin family favored by the god of fortune? Thinking of something, she began to doubt again in her heart. She looked at the god of fortune money and asked carefully, "Is the Chen family also in the jewelry business?" The god of fortune money was stunned for a moment. He turned to ask a person behind him, "Does our family have a jewelry business?" "No." The fat man shook his head and said, "There are few customers in that shabby shop all day. It is not lively, so we don't do it." "Now we do." The god of fortune money thought for a moment. He looked back at Lin Wanru and said, "The jewelry business is very profitable. The Lin family has been in this business for decades. I can trust you. The Chen family has money and you have experience. We can cooperate." Lin Wanru was stunned. After coming to her senses, she nodded slowly and said, "Shopkeeper Chen," it said. When shopkeeper Ma and shopkeeper Su heard this, their legs immediately became soft. What kind of cooperation was this? It was obvious that the Chen family was shamelessly sticking to them. When had the god of fortune money been so polite to others? The Lin family had found a great master. Even the god of fortune money had come to visit them in person. If they went against the Lin family, how could they survive in Fengzhou in the future? Bai Yu opened her mouth, but she didn't know what to say. She watched the Lin family crowd around them. She stood there in a daze. She looked at third master of the Lin family and found that he had the same expression. More than half of the people outside suddenly disappeared. Li Yi shook his head. This must be the arrangement of Zhao Yi. The reason why the god of fortune money's road to wealth was so smooth was probably because of him. It was a little exaggerated, but at least it showed that he took this matter to heart. A shadow appeared in front of him. Li Yi looked up and saw Chen Duo standing in front of him. He waved to him and said, "Brother, we meet again." Li Yi looked at him and shook his head. "I have no poems to sell to you this time." Chen Duo quickly sat to the side and said, "Hey brother, don't be like this. The price can be negotiated." Li Yi couldn't figure out what was going on in his mind. He asked, "Why do you need so many poems? Is it just to woo those brothel girls?" Chen Duo gritted his teeth and said, "I just can't stand those scholars. As long as I can make them uncomfortable, I'm happy." "So you buy poems?" "They say I'm an idiot, so I write poems for them to see." Li Yi glanced at him. Those scholars must have hurt him a lot in the past. It made sense. He was fat and didn't study well. He used to be the target of bullying in school. "You make them uncomfortable just because you write poems?" Chen Duo nodded and said, "Just thinking about how they looked back then is enough to vent my anger." "Then you might as well spend a silver coin to find a few ruffians on the street. When they come out of the brothel at night, you can cover their heads and beat them up." Li Yi looked at him and said, "If you pay a silver coin, those ruffians will definitely do it. If you can beat up 10 with 1 tael of silver, how many can you beat up with 10,000 taels of silver? You can't be unhappy with all the scholars in the world, right?" Chen Duo was stunned for a moment and said, "Is that okay?" Li Yi looked at him again. This kind of rich young master had never experienced the sufferings of the human world. A silver coin was already a lot. With this silver coin, a poor family would have food to eat and not starve to death. If this isn't enough to vent your anger, spend more money. 1 tael of silver. 1 tael of silver to find a beggar with a child on the street. When he is drinking with his friends, rush in while crying and scold him for being heartless and abandoning his wife and son. Run away after scolding him a few times. I guarantee that he won't care about you in the future. That works?" Chen Duo's eyes widened. "If you are willing to spend more money, 100 taels of silver, there will be lesser-known prostitutes willing to listen to you. They will spread the news that he doesn't pay for prostitutes. From then on, you won't see him in any brothel." Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and said, "Think about it. How many things can you do with 10,000 taels of silver? Save it. Even if you have money, you shouldn't spend it like this." Chapter 7:16. Chen Duo was really a clean stream among the rich second generation. He used to be. In terms of financial resources, there were few families in the entire Feng state that could compete with the Chen family. In terms of background, the Qian family was backed by the third prince, Zhao Yi. Which poor scholar could afford to offend him? Such a person had always suffered from the cold eyes and ridicule of others, but he just wanted to buy a poem to show off. How did the Qian god of fortune teach his son? If it was someone else, they would have lost a few lives. When he encountered difficulties in the Qi kingdom, it was because of Qian Duoduo that he survived 2 financial crises. Just because Qian Duoduo called him brother, he would definitely help him. In order to prevent him from walking down the wrong path, he had said those words after careful consideration. Qian Duoduo obviously had not experienced the ugly baptism of the secular world. After Li Yi's words, he fell into deep thought. I understand. When Li Yi was about to finish his cup of tea, Qian Duoduo suddenly stood up with a look of enlightenment on his face. Li Yi glanced at him and asked, "What do you understand?" Spend the least amount of money and do the most things. You can't just think about throwing money. You have to do things cleverly. Qian Duoduo's face showed a thoughtful expression. Every penny should be spent just right. That's what my father taught me. Li Yi nodded. Qian Duoduo understood the essence of those words so quickly. The boy was worth teaching. So, Qian Duoduo turned to look at him and asked, "When are you going to pay me back?" This was a bit like burning the bridge after crossing the river. Just now, he had taught him so many life philosophies and guided him in the right direction. He hadn't even mentioned taking the money, but he was showing off first? This is different. Qian Duoduo looked at him and said seriously, "Thank you for your advice just now. I have benefited a lot. How much is that worth? Brother, name a price and I will give it to you immediately." He changed his tone and said, "But brother, you owe me a penny. You have to pay me back." Seeing his serious look, Li Yi began to admire the god of wealth's upbringing. To be able to raise such a son, it was enough to show that the god of wealth could climb to such a position in a short time, not entirely because of Zhao Yi. Li Yi had a look of appreciation on his face. He nodded and said, "The return event is over. I don't have any money." The nature of today's banquet could be considered as half a family banquet for the Lin family. The members of the Lin family were only a small part of them. Most of them were the shopkeepers and managers of the shops under their name. Although the Lin family was not considered a big merchant, there were still some smaller merchants that depended on them, including the Bai family, the Ma family, and the Su family. Due to the close business relationship between the 4 families, they would often attend such occasions. At this time, most of the Lin family members had gone inside. Most of the people outside were outsiders. Those small merchants and the shopkeepers and managers of the Lin family were chatting with each other. They looked in a certain direction from time to time, and their faces were full of doubt and surprise. There were many rich families in Feng State City. There were also a few families that had dozens or even hundreds of years of history, which the Chen family could not compare with. However, those high and mighty families had nothing to do with them. The Qian family, whose businesses were all over Feng State, was closely related to them. If the god of wealth was dissatisfied with them, he only needed to express a little bit, and these small businesses would face the danger of collapse. The god of wealth would not come to the Lin family for no reason and put on such an attitude. The Lin family was probably lucky this time. They had climbed up this high branch. Wouldn't they be rolling in money in the future? The shopkeepers and managers of the Lin family were naturally delighted. The bigger the Lin family's business was, the higher their status would be, and the greater the benefits they would get. Those small merchants were naturally excited. Although they could not directly connect with the Qian family, it was not bad to be indirect. The Lin family was eating meat with the Qian family, so there should be some soup for them to drink, right? The Bai family, the Ma family, and the Su family did not know what was wrong with them. Originally, with their relationship, they would definitely benefit the most this time. However, they chose to fall out with the Lin family at this time. It would be difficult for them to get on the same boat this time. Shopkeeper Ma and shopkeeper Su were still standing at the door. They did not know whether to leave or stay. They had just fallen out with the Lin family, so it was not appropriate for them to stay here. It was too embarrassing. However, they could not let go of their worries. The Lin family was obviously not the same as before. If they really joined forces with the Qian family to do something to them, how could they live in the future? Bai Yu stood beside the two of them and looked in the direction that Qian god of fortune had just gone. Then she looked at the figure who was talking to young Master Qian on the other side. Her expression was a little uncertain. After a long time, there was finally some movement in the matter that everyone was concerned about. Surrounded by the crowd, Qian god of fortune walked out from inside and said with a smile, "You're too polite." It's settled then. The manager will discuss the specific cooperation matters with you when the time comes. The people present were not willing to let go of the opportunity to curry favor with Fengzhou, god of fortune. They all stood up and rushed over. This time shopkeeper Ma and the other two were isolated. The three of them stood at the door, which was particularly conspicuous. He didn't want to argue with him over the matter of a copper coin. Seeing Lin Wanru walk over, Li Yi waved his hand at her and said, "Even though that's the case, it depends on my mood. That copper coin doesn't belong to you. If I want to give it to you, I'll give it to you. If I don't, you can't take it." Young Master Qian. Qian Duo still wanted to say something, but the woman behind him had already walked over. "Miss Lin." Qian Duo returned the greeting and turned back to continue carrying out his justice. Li Yi looked at Lin Wanru and then looked at Qian Duo. He signaled in the direction of the door with his eyes. Qian Duo was stunned and asked, "What do you mean? How could he be so insensible?" Li Yi looked at him again and said, "It means that you can go." Qian Duo looked back again and finally realized something. He turned around and walked in the direction of the door. After taking 2 steps, he turned back and reminded, "1 coin." After sitting down, Lin Wanru looked at him with some confusion and asked, "Young Master Qian, do you know him?" Li Yi nodded and said, "I've seen him twice." Looking at the situation just now, it did not seem like they had only met twice. Lin Wanru looked back but did not ask again. There were too many things about him that she could not understand. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Have you negotiated with the Qian family?" Lin Wanru nodded and said, "I don't know why the Qian family wants to cooperate with us, but according to the way they just said, it will only be good for the Lin family." Seeing that there was still a trace of worry between her eyebrows, Li Yi asked, "What are you worried about?" "I always feel that, these days it has been a bit too smooth." Lin Wanru shook her head and said, It's like someone is helping us. From the foreign merchants to the Ma family and the Su family source of goods, and today the god of fortune came to visit us. Everything is too smooth." Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Isn't it too smooth? It's like being blessed by the gods." Lin Wanru smiled and said, "In the past I didn't feel anything when I stumbled along the way, but now, I feel a little uneasy." Blessed by the gods. Li Yi was stunned and said with some embarrassment, you flatter me, what?" Lin Wanru looked up at him with some doubt in her eyes. "Nothing." Li Yi hurriedly waved his hand. Lin Wanru nodded and looked at him and said, "Actually, I have something to tell you today. It was decided yesterday, so I didn't have time to tell you." Li Yi nodded and said, "Just in time, I also have something to tell you." "Then you first." "You first?" The two looked at each other and shook their heads and smiled at the same time. "I'm leaving." "I want you to be the shopkeeper of the new shop." Lin Wanru paused for a moment, then nodded and said, "Since you're leaving, you should go back first. Miss Lu really does need someone to take care of her. This matter, when I go back later, I'll talk to you." Li Yi looked at her and said, "I'm going back to the Jing kingdom." Lin Wanru's voice stopped abruptly. She looked up at him with an uncertain expression and said softly, "What did you just say?" Chapter 717. I'm going back to the Jing kingdom soon. Li Yi looked at her, paused for a moment and said, "It was an accident that I came here. Now it's time to go back." "You are going back to the Jing kingdom?" Lin Wanru was stunned, but she soon came to herself and said, "It's not good to wander outside. You have to settle down eventually. But what about Miss Lu? If you go back like this, will your family?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "I've talked to my family." In the end, he didn't intend to tell Lin Wanru everything. It was good to say goodbye like this, and the impact on her heart might be less. Lin Wanru thought for a moment and said, "When are you leaving?" "I'll arrange Brother Lin to escort you back, and bring some traveling expenses which will be needed on the way." "We're leaving today." Li Yi shook his head and said, "When we go back, there will be guards with us. We don't need to bother Brother Lin." Then, Lin Wanru looked around and said, "There are still some things there. I'll go there first." When Lin Wanru got up, there were many people around. "Wanru, do you have a candidate in mind for the manager of the new shop?" "Sister, is that the god of fortune money? Does the Qian family really want to cooperate with our Lin family? The people of the Ma family, the Su family, and the Bai family are back again. They are waiting there now. Would Wanru like to meet them?" Lin Wanru waved her hand and said, "Let's talk about these things later. I'm a little tired. I'll go back to my room first." The Lin family looked at each other. The new shop was about to open, and the god of fortune money personally came to visit. The Lin family could be said to be soaring today, and it was foreseeable that they would be rolling in money in the future. But she didn't seem to be in a good mood. When Lin Yong came back with a pot of hot tea, he looked around in surprise, scratched his head and asked, "What happened just now?" They all looked very strange. Li reached out to him and said, "Sit down, I have something to tell you." Lin Yong looked around and didn't find his Mississippi. Then he turned his head and said, "What's the matter? Do you still remember the foreign businessman that day?" Lin Yong nodded his head and said, "I remember. You're the one who can't stop talking, right?" After cooperating with the Chen family, the Lin family's business will grow bigger and bigger, and there will be more and more shops. In the future you will often see those foreign merchants. You just have to cooperate with them like before. You can say these words to my Mississippi. "I don't care what you say to me." Lin Yong asked in surprise, "Oh right, what are we eating tonight? Is it the same as yesterday?" "There is a box under the bed in the room next to Fong Lin Garden. After tonight you can take it out and give it to your Mississippi." Lin Yong was even more surprised and asked, "Wait, what are you talking about? Why don't I understand?" Li took out a booklet from his arms and handed it to him, saying, "Don't forget to give it to her. You must give it to her in person." Lin Yong was stunned. He looked at him and asked, "What on earth happened? Hurry up." On a street in Fengzhou City, a group of soldiers passed by quickly and pedestrians gave way. "What's going on? Are they going to arrest people again? Didn't they say that those people have been surrounded by the third prince? How can they come out? It seems that someone is going to be unlucky again." As the pedestrians on the street were talking, the young man in white who was walking in front urged again with a sullen face, "Hurry up. If they run away, can you bear the responsibility?" A man who looked like an official followed him and asked carefully, "It's not good to arrest people so casually, right?" The young man looked at him and said discontentedly, "What do you mean by casually arrest people? I suffered serious internal injuries because of him. Can't your yamen do something about it?" The accompanying officials lowered their heads and said nothing. County Magistrate Wu was in real trouble this time. He couldn't afford to offend any of these people from the capital. Although they were surrounded by the guards in the courier station a few days ago, the guards had retreated. Which official in Fengzhou dared to offend the first prince's people? County Magistrate Wu thought to himself, even if you have serious internal injuries, you should at least pretend to be more realistic. It's too arrogant to arrest people so aggressively. However, he should be arrogant. Several officials in the yamen had been arrested by them. As a small county magistrate, if he disobeyed them on this matter, they could use any reason to take off his hat and escort him to the capital. The young man urged, "Where is the Lin family? Are we almost there?" County Magistrate Wu pointed to the front and said, "It's just in front, almost there." A trace of pleasure appeared on the young man's face. Although he wasn't surrounded in the courier station like the censors, he was still depressed. If he didn't take revenge, he wouldn't feel at ease when he returned to the capital. He had to leave Fengzhou tomorrow. It wasn't easy for him to get an order from his cousin. What could a lowly businessman do? However, time was short. He had to let the two women go this time. "What a pity. Do you remember everything?" Li looked at Lin Yong again and asked. "Yes, I remember." Lin Yong nodded and immediately asked, "What happened? You should tell me now, right?" "I'm leaving." Lin Yong was stunned for a moment and said, "It's not too late to leave after you tell me what happened." As soon as he finished speaking, a voice suddenly came from the front, "Who is Li Xian?" Li looked at him strangely and asked, "Is there a person called Li Xian here? Isn't that you?" Lin Yong looked at him in surprise. Li was stunned for a moment. He rubbed his forehead and said, "Sorry, I forgot." Lin Yong looked at him and then at the group of officials pouring in from the door. He was confused until a somewhat familiar young man walked in from outside. His expression finally changed. "Who is Li Xian?" A man in an official uniform stood at the door and asked loudly. Seeing the appearance of an official, everyone in the courtyard was stunned at first, and then they were all surprised. The Lin family was really troublesome today. First, the Ma family, Su family, and Bai family came to quarrel with each other. Later, the money god came to cooperate with them in person. As soon as the money god left, the officials came to the door. Didn't these people really discuss it? Who is Li Xian? I don't know. I've never heard of such a person in the Lin family. Is that the county magistrate? Why is the county magistrate here? Did the Lin family get involved in a lawsuit? The county magistrate's arrival brings light to the Lin family. While people were whispering timidly, the third master of the Lin family had already greeted the county magistrate with a frightened face. He asked cautiously, "May I know why the county magistrate has come to the Lin family?" There is a person named Li Xian who is suspected of beating an official of the imperial court. Is he in the Lin family? The third master of the Lin family was stunned and said, No, there is no shopkeeper surnamed Li in the Lin family, and there is no one named Li Xian among the servants. As soon as he finished speaking, someone came from the side and whispered, Isn't the accountant brought back by the eldest sister called Li Xian? Chapter 7:18. Beating up an official of the imperial court? Bai Yu, who was standing behind the crowd, was startled. He naturally knew who Li Xian was and had even personally investigated him. He was the scholar who lived next to Fragrant Forest Park. Previously, he had embarrassed himself in front of Lin Wanru. Bai Yu naturally did not have a good impression of him. This person actually dared to beat up an official of the imperial court and even caused the county magistrate to come looking for him personally. This was truly gratifying. In an instant, Bai Yu's gaze immediately turned into a mocking one. The third master of the Lin family was also startled when he heard this. Then he seemed to have thought of something and turned his head to look in a certain direction. At a table in the back, a young man slowly stood up. The scholar that Wanru had picked up had initially caused a small disturbance in the Lin family. After all, the position of an accountant was very important. No one would feel at ease handing it over to an outsider. However, it was later discovered that this was not a measure taken by the young mistress of the Lin family to further monopolize the power. The scholar's title of accountant was just a title. It was said that he only stayed in the small courtyard next to Fragrant Forest Park and rarely went out. The family had their own guesses as to whether he was an accountant or a lover. However, this had nothing to do with their interests, so they gradually stopped paying attention to it. As time passed, they even forgot his name. He did not expect to hear his name again from the county magistrate's mouth. The third master of the Lin family was slightly angry. This scholar ate the Lin family's food and lived under the Lin family's roof. He actually caused so much trouble for the Lin family. The third master of the Lin family's face darkened. He looked at the scholar and said, Li Xian, the county magistrate is asking a question. Hurry up and come over. In an instant, the focus of everyone's attention immediately shifted to the scholar in front of them. Beating up an official of the imperial court? Li walked over and looked at the county magistrate. He asked, May I know where the official of the imperial court that you mentioned just now is? County Magistrate Wu frowned slightly and said, Come with me to the county office and you'll know. Although there was something fishy about this matter, there was no need to make the first prince unhappy over an unimportant person and bring unnecessary trouble to the third prince. If I tell you to go, then go. Why are you talking so much nonsense? The third master of the Lin family frowned and said, Hurry up and go. In the crowd, the sloppy old man threw down the chicken leg. Li Yi secretly made a gesture to him. The old man shook his head and picked up the chicken leg again. Li Yi didn't look at the Lin family's third master. He glanced at the young man standing behind the constables, who was looking at him with a mocking expression. He shook his head slightly. Before he left, he didn't even let him have some peace. It seemed that it was necessary to see Zhao Yi yesterday. Otherwise, after he left, who knew what would happen to the Lin family? Li Yi glanced at the county magistrate and said, Let's talk outside. Wait. A voice came from behind. Lin Wanru walked to the county magistrate and said, I was also there that day. Please take me away with you. The third master of the Lin family's third master's face changed and he said, Wanru, what are you doing here? It's none of your business here. Go back quickly. Just now, he wanted to take away the power in Lin Wanru's hands. But just now, the money god obviously came to the Lin family for her. The future of the Lin family depended on her. Now she couldn't have anything happen to her. Li Yi turned to look at Lin Wanru and said, It's really nothing serious. Just make it clear. Lin Wanru looked away from the young man behind the constables and looked at the county magistrate. She said, Aren't we going to the county office? Let's go. Lin Yong looked anxious and said, Miss, don't go. It's obviously that bastard's. Lin Wanru glanced at him and Lin Yong immediately closed his mouth. Let's go. County Magistrate Wu glanced at her and said lightly. There wasn't much difference between a scholar with no background and a merchant's daughter. Although the matter wasn't destined to be too serious, judging from the intentions of the person behind him, the scholar would probably suffer some physical pain. Sir, I don't think it's so troublesome. Li Yi said with a smile as he stuffed something into the county magistrate's hand. County Magistrate Wu was stunned. Feeling the weight of the thing in his hand, he thought that even if it was a bribe, such a small piece of silver was too small. His face darkened and he said, Presumptuous. How dare you bribe me? Guards, as County Magistrate Wu said. He raised his hand and intended to throw the silver on the ground fiercely in order to show how impartial and upright he was. Before throwing it, he took a casual glance at it. In an instant, his eyes widened as his arm froze in the air and he couldn't move his eyes away anymore. This jade pendant had just been sent to King Feng's mansion by him some time ago. Today when he saw it again, it still felt the same. County Magistrate Wu's eyelids twitched when he saw two yamen runners coming out from behind him and walking toward the scholar. He shouted, "What are you doing?" The two yamen runners looked over in confusion. "Sir, didn't you ask us to shut up?" County Magistrate Wu's face darkened. When he turned around, his expression melted like the spring rain. He put the jade pendant back in Li Yi's hand and said with a smile, "This jade pendant can't be thrown around. Please keep it." Li Yi asked with a smile, "Sir, are we still going to the county office?" "No, I'm not going." County Magistrate Wu shook his head fiercely and said, "I'm sorry to disturb you. We'll leave now, right now." Li Yi put away the jade pendant. Zhao Yi did not lie to him. This jade pendant could be exchanged for silver in times of crisis and could also be used to solve difficulties. It was really a must-have for traveling to the Qi Kingdom. Seeing the sudden change of the county magistrate's attitude, the third master of the Lin family was stunned. He opened his mouth but did not say anything. He was not the only one who was stunned. The county magistrate came in a fierce manner and left in a hurry. He did not do anything in between. It was extremely strange. Lin Wanru looked at County Magistrate Wu, and when she turned her head to look at Li Yi, a trace of unfamiliarity suddenly appeared in her eyes. "County Magistrate Wu, what are you doing?" The young man finally came to his senses. He stepped forward and said angrily, "Are you going to bend the law for personal gain?" County Magistrate Wu's face darkened. He did not want to offend the first prince's people, but it did not mean that he was willing to offend the third prince. The person who owned the jade pendant was obviously someone the third prince attached great importance to. County Magistrate Wu did not dare to offend the third prince. After all, the first prince was not the real master in Feng province. He looked at the young man with a sullen face and said coldly, "Do I need you to teach me how to do things?" This scene caused everyone present to be dumbfounded. Today they not only saw the god of fortune in Feng province, but also the county magistrate's internal strife. This trip to the Lin family was not in vain. How dare you? Even in the capital he was a domineering and unscrupulous person. How dare a remote county magistrate treat him like this? The young man was angry and said harshly, "Do you still want to be the county magistrate? I'm afraid you can't make the decision on this matter, can you?" A voice came from outside. After being stunned for a moment, the people immediately looked at the door. Li Yi stretched out his hand and rubbed between his eyebrows. Looking at the figures coming in from outside, he murmured, "Zhao Yi, you've gone too far." Chapter 719. Most of the people didn't recognize the few figures who walked in from outside the door. However, the young man at the front who had just spoken looked noble. The two young masters on his left and right were also outstanding and had extraordinary identities. Not only that, but there were also 2 rows of armored and armed guards behind them. At a glance there were probably dozens of them. It was the first time that most of the people present had seen such a lineup. They didn't know these people, but there was one person that everyone knew. Fortune God of Money, who had left and returned, stood behind the young man as if he was the leader. It was completely different from the situation where he was surrounded by stars. Zhao Xiuan Yang Yanzhou. Lin Wanru looked at the 2 people on her left and right. When her gaze moved to the face of the person in the middle, she finally revealed a shocked expression. "Your Highness King Feng, who's talking?" The young man was in a fit of anger. When he was suddenly rebutted, he subconsciously wanted to turn around and scold back. However, when he turned around and saw the person who walked in, he immediately became dispirited. He trembled and involuntarily took a few steps back, swallowing the words that were already in his throat. "Feng Feng. Your Highness King Feng." Although his identity wasn't ordinary and he had the right to be arrogant, he also knew that there were 2 people in Feng province that he couldn't afford to offend. One was his cousin, the eldest prince of the Qi Kingdom, Prince Heng Zhaozheng. The other was the true ruler of Feng province, King Feng, whom even the eldest prince didn't dare to provoke. He did provoke, but the result wasn't good. The relay station where he lived was surrounded by 1,000 guards. Although his freedom wasn't restricted, he was humiliated, lost the hearts of the people, and even lost his credit. At this moment, he was even more depressed than County Magistrate Wu. "Greetings, Your Highness King Feng." County Magistrate Wu bowed apologetically and secretly wiped his cold sweat. As expected, this person's relationship with His Highness King Feng was extraordinary. Not only did he give the jade pendant that represented his identity to King Feng, but he also came personally. If County Magistrate Wu hadn't been quick-witted just now, he would have made a big mistake. If they didn't hear the young man's trembling voice clearly just now, they finally heard the county magistrate's words just now, which were spoken fluently and clearly in the official language. King Feng. The third master of the Lin family trembled as he said this, and immediately knelt down. When the crowd regained their senses, they also lowered their heads and knelt down. Unless it was a special occasion, the people of the Qi kingdom did not have to kneel to the officials. However, the person in front of them was a genuine prince, the lord of Feng province. In this place his reputation was unparalleled. They held this name in awe and veneration. Wah. Even the thick-skinned Lin Yong knelt down without hesitation. In the entire courtyard, the only people who hadn't knelt down in front of Zhao Yi were a sloppy old man who was sitting in a seat and eating a chicken drumstick, Li Yi who stood there with a helpless expression, and Lin Wanru who hadn't knelt down because he was holding her wrist. Lin Wanru looked at him and said in a panic, "This is His Highness King Feng. You can't be rude." In the crowd, Bai Yu raised his head and took a look. After being stunned for a moment, a gloating expression quickly appeared on his face. "Come in and talk." Li Yi sighed and turned to walk inside. Lin Wanru was pulled by him. She stared blankly at the people in front of her and unconsciously followed him in. "I'm a little presumptuous. Brother Li, please don't take offense." Zhao Yi laughed heartily and walked up quickly. Dozens of guards rushed into the courtyard and surrounded the hall that the group had entered. The gloating expression on Bai Yu's face froze. Confusion, and deep fear appeared in his eyes. The third master of the Lin family was still kneeling on the spot. He stared blankly at this scene and even forgot to get up. At this moment, his heart was pounding. Was the person who spoke just now really the accountant of the Lin family? The gigolo kept by Wanru? How could he speak to His Highness King Feng like that? How could His Highness respond like that? The third master of the Lin family rubbed his forehead with his hand. He felt dizzy. The accountant of the Lin family, the gigolo kept by Wanru? He spoke to him like that and reprimanded him. His Highness King Feng was so polite to him, not only did he feel dizzy, but his vision also darkened until it was completely black. "Third uncle, old third, what's wrong with you? Wake up." The muffled sound of his head hitting the ground finally brought everyone from the Lin family back to their senses. They all rushed in the direction that the third master of the Lin family had fainted on. In the hall, Li rubbed his forehead. He looked at Zhao Yi and asked, "Isn't this a little too much?" Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "I'm leaving for the capital tomorrow. I can't disappoint Brother Li, so I thought it was better to come personally." Zhao Yi took a sip of tea and glanced at Lin Wanru. He then looked away and said, "This way, even if I leave, no one in Feng province will dare to make things difficult for the Lin family. Are you satisfied with this, Brother Li?" Lin Wanru was stunned. The hand that was pouring tea for Li Yi also trembled slightly. Li Yi waved his hand and said helplessly, "Thank you." The third prince's visit to the Lin family was much more useful than Fatty Chen's visit. In the future, no one in Feng province would dare to do anything to the Lin family even if they had the guts of a bear or a leopard. However, the problem was, how could he cover up this matter? Moreover, before you leave, Zhao Yi should see you off. Zhao Yi looked at him and added, "Don't forget that you still owe me a meal." Li Yi was stunned and asked, "Didn't I pay you yesterday?" Zhao Yi looked at him and said, "Brother Li, did you forget that you didn't pay the bill yesterday? One treats and the other pays." Li Yi looked at him in surprise and asked, "Is there a problem?" Zhao Yi looked at him deeply and said, "You left in a hurry yesterday. There are some things that you didn't have time to ask. If you go to the capital like this, I won't be at ease." Li Yi took a sip of tea. Zhao Yi looked at him and said, "The imperial edict from the capital arrived yesterday. Many officials in Feng province were found to have their properties confiscated through the debit and credit method. I'm afraid some of them will be beheaded. The imperial court has been in turmoil for a long time because of this. Brother Li, why don't you tell me if this method is feasible or not?" Li looked at him and asked, "You want to implement this method?" Zhao Yi nodded and said, "The problem of the Qi kingdom is already very serious." Li shook his head and said, "If this method is implemented vigorously, the Zhao family will die. If it is not implemented, the world will die." Zhao Yi heard this and frowned slightly. The debit and credit method, turmoil in the imperial court, confiscation of properties, beheading. Lin Wanru's eyes flashed. It seemed that a certain image began to appear in her mind. What will happen if people find out about this method of checking accounts? Actually, it's nothing much. At most, the situation will be unstable, the entire country will be in turmoil, heads will fall, and blood will flow like a river. She glanced sideways. It turned out that he hadn't lied to her when he said those words at that time. Zhao Yi was the third prince, so it was impossible for him to remain at the Lin clan for too long. Moreover, he was leaving for the capital tomorrow and would have many other matters to attend to. It was already extremely rare for him to be able to stay at the Lin clan for an hour. Lin Wanru stood in the hall. The scene of his conversation with His Highness King Feng Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen appeared in her mind. She finally raised her head and looked at him and asked, "You've known them for a long time?" "I've known the third prince and Zhao Xiuwen for almost a year. However, to be honest, I've only met them once or twice before." Li thought about it and said, "I met Yang Yanzhou a little earlier. He was at Qing and prefecture in the Jing kingdom. I've known him since then. He's known as the #1 scholar of Qing and prefecture. I've only met him twice or thrice, but we haven't spoken much. I know you have many questions, but before that..." Li looked at her and extended his hand. "Miss Lin, let me reintroduce myself. I am Li." Chapter 720. Lin Wanru looked at him in a daze and asked, "The #1 scholar of the Jing kingdom, Li Yi? The Lin family's banquet, the god of wealth's visit, King Feng's visit, and the scholar she had picked up 2 months ago was the scholar she admired greatly." At this moment, Lin Wanru felt like she was in a dream. What #1 scholar? It's all nonsense. You can't take it seriously. Li Yi's outstretched hand stopped in midair. He said, "But it should be the Li Yi you're thinking of." Lin Wanru's expression was a little confused. After a long time she looked away and murmured, No wonder he copied the handwriting of the Jing kingdom's #1 scholar, Li Yi. It was more similar than Zhao Xiuwen's. No wonder he never studied or asked about poetry. It was because no one in Feng province or even the Qi kingdom could compare to him in these matters. No wonder a scholar knew the way of business. Now that she thought about it, those foreign merchants were willing to give so much profit to the Lin family because he was Li Yi. Li Yi of the Jing kingdom, Li Yi who had defeated the Qi kingdom's Wenzong, defeated the Qi kingdom's poet saint, and defeated the Qi kingdom's diplomatic mission. His reputation had spread throughout the Qi kingdom a long time ago. Lin Wanru looked down at his outstretched hand and raised her head again. Li Yi's expression was a little awkward. He said, "This is a form of etiquette in my hometown. It's called the handshake ceremony. When two people who don't know each other meet, they will shake each other's hands as a sign of politeness." Lin Wanru was stunned. She reached out to hold his hand and shook her head. She said, "The Jing kingdom's etiquette is really strange. Since they were already being honest, they might as well be honest with each other." Li reached out and took off the mask on his face. Lin Wanru's expression froze again when she saw this. She looked at the unfamiliar face and asked in a trembling voice, "Is this your original appearance?" Li nodded and said, "Because of some reasons, I have no choice but to do so." Lin Wanru sat on the chair and said in a low voice, I want to be alone for a while." When Li walked out of the hall, he bumped into Lin Yong. When he walked over, he asked, "Brother, are my miss and the Li brothers inside?" Li patted him on the shoulder and said, "Don't go in yet. Let Miss Lin have some time alone." Lin Yong's footsteps suddenly stopped. He turned his head and looked up and down. An expression of disbelief appeared on his face. He said, Can you say something more for me?" Li looked at him and said, "If you come to the Jing kingdom again, you can come to the capital to find me." "You are the Li brothers?" Lin Yong gasped. The expression on his face was no different from seeing a ghost in broad daylight. "Gone?" The sloppy old man wiped his mouth and walked over to ask. Li looked back and waved his hand saying, "Let's go." The Lin family's banquet today had not ended. It should be said that the process of previous banquets had only just begun. However, after so many twists and turns in such a short period of time, many people did not have much interest in the banquet that was only held twice a year. The atmosphere was abnormally quiet. Everyone watched as the Lin family accountant walked out. The scene that had just happened appeared in their minds. They looked at the members of the Lin family with extremely complicated gazes. Suddenly, someone exclaimed in a low voice, His appearance." On the other side, the young man named Bayu's face was pale. The two shopkeepers beside him, Ma and Su, looked even worse. Shopkeeper Ma, who had been arrogant just a moment ago, was now crying. He looked at the third master of the Lin family and said with a trembling voice, Third master, I beg you let us see Wanru again." In the courtyard, Li glanced at Mississippi Lu and asked, "Are you done packing?" Mississippi Lu nodded. There was originally nothing to pack. When they came it was empty. When they returned, there was nothing but a few clothes and a chest filled with gold. There was nothing else to bring. Li looked at the sky and said, "Then let's go. Let's go. If we're fast, we'll reach Shuzhou by this time tomorrow." The sloppy old man let out a long sigh. Outside the door, Taoist priest Yuan stood there. There were more than 10 people standing behind him. Even further away there were many figures in the crowd looking in the same direction. Lin Yong stood at the entrance of Fonglin Garden. His mouth was open and had not closed since the beginning. Li walked over and patted his shoulder. He said, "Where's Miss Lin?" "At home." Lin Yong looked into Fonglin Garden and turned around. He said, "Do you want me to call her?" "No need." Li retracted his hand from his shoulder and waved it casually. "Goodbye, big brother Lin." Lin Yong nodded and looked at him in a daze. He said somewhat mechanically, "Goodbye." When there was no one in front of him, Lin Yong came back to his senses. He looked at the courtyard next to him and quickly walked over. The furnishings in the courtyard were still the same as before. There was a clay pot at the door of the kitchen that was used to boil medicine. However, there was no longer the fragrance that made him salivate just by smelling it. Thinking of something, he walked into the room and leaned over to look under the bed. After a while he pulled out a box from under the bed. The box was very big and it was not locked. Lin Yong opened it casually. The next moment he was dazzled by all kinds of colors. Fengzhou Courier Station. "You said that Zhao Yi personally went to the Lin family to see the person you met the other day?" Zhao Jing looked at the young man who was still a little pale and asked, "Who is that person?" "I've already asked someone to investigate." The young man took out a piece of paper and handed it over. He said, "When I came back just now, I saw that they seemed to have left the city, the accountant of the Lin family?" Zhao Jing frowned. After looking at it several times he still had no clue. "He's from the Jing kingdom. Why was he so polite?" Li Xian. At a certain moment Zhao Jing seemed to think of something. His expression changed and he immediately said, "Chase." In Fonglin Garden, Lin Yong picked up an exquisite Buddha statue and exclaimed, "Miss, this is colored glass." He looked down at the box at his feet and said, "These are all colored glass. How much is it worth?" Lin Wanru's gaze only stayed on the colored glass for a moment before she looked away. Lin Yong's voice came again. "Miss, when the Li brothers left just now you were clearly in the shop. Why didn't you come out?" Lin Wanru put down the note in her hand that said, "Sell it as soon as possible." She said, "Put these things away and go back to work. Brother Lin, make some preparations these days. I plan to let you go to the newly opened shop." "Ah?" Lin Yong was stunned. When he wanted to ask again he suddenly turned his head and looked outside. On the street outside Fonglin Garden, a group of soldiers ran quickly, causing a commotion on the street. Lin Yong sighed and said, "Feng State City is in chaos again." In King Feng's mansion, Zhao Yi, who was arranging many things after leaving, turned his head and asked, "How many people did they bring?" The person in front of him said, 100 personal guards. Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "Did my brother also go?" "The first prince is still at the courier station, but the young master of the Yang family went with him." Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "Then let him be." Compared to what he had to face and deal with next, these things were no longer enough to divert his attention. The conflict between the factions in the imperial court, the panic in the local counties, and the confrontation with the first prince in the capital. Zhao Yi rubbed the space between his eyebrows and murmured, "You left so quickly." Chapter 721. Outside Fengzhou City, Li Yi stood at the foot of the city wall and looked up. On the towering city wall, the two words Fengzhou were particularly majestic and majestic. At first glance, one could tell that it was written by a famous master. He looked at the city gate again. After leaving this time, it was uncertain whether he would come back here again. He felt a little guilty about Lin Wanru. She had always taken good care of him and Mississippi Lu, but in return, she had lied to him. Although the lies were kind, Li Yi still could not face her calmly before leaving. After a while, he collected all his thoughts, turned to look into the distance, waved his hand and said softly, "Let's go." Half an hour later, "Go after them." Inside Fengzhou City, a group of fast horses galloped out. The young man in the front was full of excitement and said loudly, "His Highness has ordered that whoever catches them will be heavily rewarded." On the official road, pedestrians and peddlers gave way. The horses galloped, stirring up smoke and dust. In Fanglin Garden, Lin Wanru slowly closed the booklet in her hands. The description on it was extremely detailed and detailed the path that Fragrant Forest Garden would take in the future. Even though she still could not understand some of the methods, she did not doubt it at all after her previous experience. According to this plan, in the end, she did not need to do most of the things in the shop by herself. She only needed to make some important decisions occasionally. At that time, it seemed that she would have a deeper control over the Lin family's business than it was now. If she had obtained such a thing 2 months ago, she would have regarded it as a treasure and would have attached great importance to it. But now she was not interested in it at all. She picked up the teacup and took a sip. The tea was still red dates and wolfberry tea, but it did not have the same taste as yesterday. The sun was about to set in the west. After leaving Fanglin Garden, the light in the small room gradually dimmed. Lin Wanru looked at the teacup without any expression on her pretty face. She just sat there quietly. After an unknown period of time, this trace of silence was finally broken. Lin Yong walked in from outside, gently knocked on the door and said, "Miss, the steward of the Chen family is here. Got it? Let him wait outside for a while." Lin Wanru nodded and slowly stood up. There was no fluctuation in her tone as she spoke. Lin Yong's eyes were a little dazed. He only felt that there seemed to be something different about the miss at this moment. Fang jumped down from a carriage and said, "Son-in-law, there's no hurry to go back. There's a town ahead. Let's rest here for a while. We'll be able to make it back before it gets dark." A team of more than 100 people naturally couldn't carry all kinds of weapons on their waists and swagger through the streets like this. At least they couldn't do that in the Qi Kingdom. The goods on the carts were real goods. This time they had traded glass for a lot of good things from the Qi Kingdom. When they went back they could take them with them. Li nodded and said, "Then let's rest for a while." Fang and the others had traveled almost day and night from the capital city for a month. After arriving in Fengzhou, they didn't have a good rest, so they didn't have to rush back. There seemed to be some grievances between the sloppy old man and the Taoist surnamed Yuan. Usually they didn't bother to talk to each other. At this time they were on their own side. Fang saw him take out a milk candy from his bosom and throw it into his mouth. He smacked his lips and said, "Hey Chief Su, give me one." The sloppy old man glanced at him and said, "Not many. Don't be so stingy. Just this once. Don't do it again." A candy flew over from a distance. Fang peeled it and threw it into his mouth. He said, "I thought we were going to do something big with so many people. I didn't expect to come back so easily. Want to do something big?" Li looked back and said, "Here's your chance." Old Fang turned his head to look behind him and his expression froze. At the same time, many people around him stood up and looked in a certain direction. They saw smoke and dust billowing in front of them. Occasionally, the neighing of horses could be heard. A young man on the horse urged, "Hurry up. They won't be able to go far in the carriage. They should be right in front." Seeing that there seemed to be a caravan in front of them, the young man hurriedly reined in his horse and shouted, "The people in front, stop." He dismounted and swept his gaze across the crowd. He waved his hand and said, "It's nothing. You can go." Before he could finish his sentence, his gaze suddenly stopped on the face of a woman in front of the crowd. After a moment of shock, he said with joy, "It's them. Capture them all." He waved his hand. The 100 personal guards behind him immediately dismounted and surrounded the entire caravan. Although the other side seemed to have a lot of people, these people were all the personal guards that Prince Heng had carefully selected. Even if they had to face bandits several times their number, they didn't have to be afraid or worried at all. The young man stood at the front and shouted, "Where is Li Xian? Hurry up and come out." Bang. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly felt a pain in the back of his leg. He could not help but kneel on the ground. He raised his head and was about to scold them when he saw that the faces of the people inside were all wearing a smile that he could not understand. What he did not understand was where these people had taken out their weapons in the time it took for them to lower their heads. "Everyone hurry up. Don't waste time." Fang clenched his fists and was the first to walk out. To let the same number of experts from the heaven ranking and earth ranking, as well as the high priests of the intelligence office, deal with these so-called personal guards who at most had some skills, even if there were a few among them who could be considered to be capable, they would not be able to last long against these people. Even the sloppy old man and the Taoist surnamed Yuan did not make a move. In just a short while, among the 100 people, not a single one was still standing. The young man who was still kneeling on the ground was already pale. His body was still trembling, and he said in a trembling voice, "We are the personal guards of the eldest prince. If you dare to do anything to us, you will not be able to walk out of the Qi kingdom." The eldest prince's personal guards? Fang cracked his knuckles and said, "Young master, I have a bold idea." Zhao Yi walked out of the Fengzhou courier station and sighed slightly. He had originally planned to leave for the capital today, but now he had to postpone his journey. The young master of the Yang family had disappeared. 100 personal guards of the eldest prince had been stripped naked and tied up in a forest outside Fengzhou city. They were only found in the early hours of this morning. 100 people. Just thinking about that scene gave him a headache. Although he had long expected that the people sent by the eldest prince would fail, he did not expect that it would be in such a way. The eldest prince had long been disgraced. It was not a big deal for him to be disgraced again. However, he could not pretend that he did not see such a thing happening in Fengzhou. Moreover, the missing young master of the Yang family could be considered as an imperial censor. Although it was only a temporary position, it would be difficult to explain it to the Yang family. Zhao Jing walked out with a dark face and said coldly, "Who did you let go? If you can't give me an explanation for this matter, you will have to explain it to my father when we return to the capital." As soon as Zhao Jing finished speaking, an official rushed over and said loudly, "Your Highness, there is an urgent report from Bingzhou. Last night, several imperial censors and 100 personal guards of Prince Heng entered Bingzhou and gathered the officials of Bingzhou. Under Prince Heng's order, the officials of Bingzhou were asked to confess their mistakes and use silver to atone for their crimes. At dawn, they left Bingzhou with 600,000 taels of silver. A bunch of nonsense." Zhao Zheng was stunned when he heard this. In the next moment, his expression changed and he said coldly, "The imperial censors are all at the relay station. When did I give such an order?" Because of the matter of the silver, he was already at the heart of the struggle. There were countless opinions among the people and there were many voices of dissatisfaction with him in the imperial court. The word silver for discussing guilt could not even be mentioned now. How could he do such a stupid thing? According to the official who just arrived from Bingzhou, those people had the token of Prince Heng's residence and had verified the identity of Imperial Censor Yang. Zhao Zheng was stunned for a moment. As if he had thought of something, he immediately asked, "Is that Imperial Censor called Yang Tsong?" The official replied, "Yes." Zhao Jing stood there in a daze. He felt his vision darken and the world around him was spinning. Seeing Prince Heng collapse, the official immediately rushed forward and said in a panic, "Your Highness, Your Highness, Your Highness, are you all right?" Chapter 722. Have you heard? Prince Heng's men were robbed by a group of strong men yesterday. What do you mean by heard? I saw it with my own eyes. Just this morning, hundreds of people were tied naked to trees. That scene, tsk, immoral. It's really immoral. That's nothing. I also heard that when these people came back, they all covered their buttocks. I didn't expect the first prince's men to like this. Could it be that he also... Today there was a lot of discussion in Feng State City. People could be heard talking about something on the streets and alleys. That was because that piece of news was simply too shocking to them. Early in the morning, a woodcutter had just walked into the forest when he saw 100 people being stripped naked and tied to a tree. Perhaps because of the morning, some uncontrollable changes had occurred to their bodies. Just thinking about it was a spectacular sight. That kind of scene and that kind of image would linger in the mind of anyone who saw it for the rest of their lives. Ever since the first prince had come to Feng State, he had been arresting people and discussing the crime. Now he had done such a thing. It had firmly occupied the headlines of Feng State daily. It was believed that this incident would occupy the headlines for a long time. When Lin Yong told Lin Wanru about these things, it was, of course, the edited version. I don't know where this strong man came from. He did things so decisively. It's so satisfying. His face was full of excitement. Then he put something on the table and said, "Miss, this is what you wanted." He looked at the poetry book that he had just bought and asked, "Miss, is the Li brothers really the #1 talent of the Jing kingdom? Were these poems and lyrics also written by him?" Lin Wanru didn't answer. Lin Yong looked around, shook his head and walked out. Anyway, that was what the people outside said. When he bought the poetry book, he was almost squeezed out by the young ladies. He really didn't expect that a pretty boy like the Li brothers would be so popular with women. Lin Yong walked to the entrance of Fonglin Park and looked in a certain direction out of habit. He couldn't help but lick his lips. It's almost time to eat again. At this time, in a county town located at the border of the Qi Kingdom's Qing province, a group of over 100 caravans had stopped. They were seated in the largest restaurant in the county town. That's all there is to making money. Fang didn't forget to sigh as he chewed on the pork shoulder. He had the capital to be arrogant. In one night, he had produced 600,000 taels of silver. Anyone could be a little arrogant. However, there was a slight delay in time. Bing province was not far from Feng province. Presumably, they had already received the news. With more than 100 people and so many carriages and goods, it was destined that they would not be able to travel very quickly. The original plan might have to be slightly altered. Yang Liuqing took out a map and spread it on the table. He pointed at a place in front of them and said, "Marshal uncle, with our current speed, it will take us 1.5 days to reach Chongzhou. If we travel at top speed from Fengzhou, we can reach there in a day. So we can't go back through Chongzhou. Is there any other way?" Yang Liuqing nodded. He used his finger to draw on the map and said, "If we go west from here, we can go around Chongzhou. It might take us a few days, but it's safe enough." Although they had 2 grandmasters and over 100 top-notch martial arts masters, it wouldn't be a problem for them to break through a city that wasn't heavily guarded. They had to go back. It was better not to cause so much trouble. If they really did that, they were afraid that casualties would be unavoidable. It was not worth it. Li looked at the map. Yang Liuqing explained, "If we go west from here for another day, we will almost reach the border of the Wu Kingdom. We can go around here. This is the chaotic land where the Qi Kingdom, Jing Kingdom, and Wu Kingdom intersect. If we go through here, we can go around Chongzhou. In another 2 days we will reach Shuzhou." Fang asked doubtfully, "Didn't you say that place is very chaotic? I heard that there are countless mountain bandits and bandits running amok. Will there be trouble?" Yang Liuqing shook her head and said, "This mountain range stretches on and on. There are countless mountain bandits and bandits here. But the really powerful mountain bandits are all in the depths. The power is complicated and the specific situation is not that simple. In short, there are only some small bandits on the periphery. There are no more than dozens of people, so there's nothing to be afraid of." Li looked at her in surprise and asked, "You are very familiar with this place?" Yang Liuqing was stunned. She nodded and said, "I learned about it when I came here. There shouldn't be much difference." The slovenly old man looked at Yang Liuqing meaningfully and spat out the chicken bone in his mouth. He said, "This girl is right. Although that place is a little chaotic, as long as we don't go too deep and encounter those hard-to-chew bones, there won't be any big problem." Even the slovenly old man said that it was hard to chew bones. It seemed that that place was really not simple. Li looked at the map carefully. This time they just passed the periphery, so there shouldn't be any problem. He nodded and said, "Then let's go here." King of Shu's mansion, Shuzhou. King of Shu paced anxiously in the hall with a gloomy expression. When footsteps came from outside the hall, he immediately asked before the person who came in said anything, "How is it? Any news from there?" The person bowed and said, "Your Highness, I have confirmed it from the people of the Secret Intelligence Office. They did find County Marquis Li in the Qi Kingdom and will come back soon." Bang! Sure enough, he is in the Qi Kingdom. King of Shu punched the table and squeezed out a few words through his teeth. These days, he had almost mobilized all the government offices in Shuzhou and even sent out the guards of the king's mansion. In order to find him, he had spent a lot of effort. He didn't expect that Li Yi was not in the Jing Kingdom or Shuzhou at all. Didn't that mean that all the effort he put in was for naught? Thinking of this, King of Shu immediately felt that he had been fooled. One person thought for a moment and said tentatively, "Your Highness, they will return to Shuzhou eventually. Why don't we? Shuzhou has now been taken over by the Secret Intelligence Office." In the crowd, Jiang Zian glanced at the person and said, "At first, General Fan thought the same as you. Now grass can grow on his grave." Thinking of something, the person stopped talking and his face immediately turned pale. The people of the Secret Intelligence Office from the Jing Kingdom wanted to take over the military power on the first day they arrived in Shuzhou. Shuzhou was far away from the emperor, so the orders from the Jing Kingdom had little effect here. It had always been like this. On that day, a garrison general said that the request of the Secret Intelligence Office was unreasonable and he would not hand over the power even if he died. As a result, he really died. He had just been buried not long ago, but not long after, grass would grow on his grave. King of Shu didn't speak, but the blue veins on his forehead couldn't help throbbing. As the first prince, he was suppressed every step he took in the Jing kingdom and was even beaten in front of the civil and military officials. Now he came to Shuzhou and couldn't make decisions on his own fief. This was the most depressing thing in his heart. The atmosphere in the hall was a little depressing. At this time, another servant of the prince's mansion came in and said, "Your Highness, young Master Fang Yongfang wants to see you." King of Shu nodded and said, "Let him in." Chapter 723. Your Highness, King of Shu. The young man surnamed Fang came in from outside. He first bowed to King of Shu and then turned his head to look around. King of Shu looked around, waved his hand and said, "You can leave now." Hearing this, everyone left one after another. Only King of Shu and the young man surnamed Fang were left in the hall. King of Shu looked at him and said lightly, "Li Yi is coming back." What? Fang Yong's expression changed immediately. "He went to the Qi kingdom recently and will be back soon." King of Shu looked at him and asked, "Can your people get rid of him before he arrives in Shuzhou?" Fang Yong's expression changed for a while. He shook his head and said, "No. The power of the holy religion in Shuzhou was weak. Her Majesty was injured and had not recovered yet. A large number of masters gathered in Shuzhou some time ago suddenly appeared and then disappeared. It was said that they went to the Qi kingdom. Now that he thought about it, it must have something to do with Li Yi. With the remaining power of the holy religion in Shuzhou, even if another guru came, they would be at risk of being destroyed, let alone so many masters. The right thing to do was to escape before they came back. They didn't even dare to take back the token of the Blue Dragon ambassador. How could they have other plans? Didn't you say that you have 100,000 followers? King of Shu looked at him angrily and said, "Didn't you say that there are countless masters in your sect? You can't even handle such a small matter. How can I believe you?" The young man surnamed Fang was expressionless. He lowered his head and said nothing. Hearing the voice of King of Shu coming from inside, full of anger and mania, the two guards at the door looked at each other and immediately became very cautious. At this time, His Highness could not be provoked. He would even severely punish them for not standing properly. This was not the first time such a thing had happened. Fortunately, it didn't take long before young Master Fang, who often came to the king's mansion, came out. He didn't look very good and there was no sound in the hall. The two of them heaved a long sigh of relief because they didn't suffer any punishment because of their posture. Young Master Fang was in trouble. From the looks of it, he must have been scolded badly by the King of Shu. The two of them wiped the cold sweat off their foreheads. When they put down their hands, a voice came from the side. "Who allowed you to wipe your sweat?" The King of Shu looked at the two of them with cold eyes and said, "Each of you, go down and receive 50 strokes of the cane." The two of them looked at each other and tightened their grip on the sabers at their waists. In the end, they loosened their grip. At the same time, the youth surnamed Fang walked out of the King of Shu's residence. Two blue-robed men came forward and respectfully said, "Protector." The youth with the surname Fang turned around and looked at the gate of the King of Shu's residence. He said coldly, "We'll do it tonight. Son-in-law, shall we make our move?" Fang rubbed his hands together and looked excitedly at a group of dozens of people with red scarves covering their heads. He turned around and asked Li Yi. Li Yi could finally confirm that Fang really had the genes of a bandit. They had already destroyed 3 bandit dens along the way, and after a while the number would increase to 4. There was indeed a reason why this place was known as the Land of Chaos. Ever since they entered the mountains they had encountered 3 groups of bandits with more than a dozen people. The last group even had more than 100 people. Such a group of bandits would be considered a small force in other places. However, in this place they could only stay in the periphery. Usually they would go down the mountain to rob livestock and food. Occasionally small caravans would pass by and they would be fat sheep. If they ventured deeper into the mountains, they would either be annexed by other large bandit groups or lose their lives in the process of fighting for territory. In the beginning, Fang was still worried that there would be trouble bringing so many gold and silver goods through a place where bandits ran rampant. After encountering it twice, he gradually began to realize that being a bandit was his original profession. The group had already been moving for 2 days. Not only did the goods not decrease, they even increased. The 3 waves of mountain bandits were all suppressed by the group and their dens were raided. Unfortunately, the mountain bandits' nests weren't rich at all. Old Fang and the others only took the items that caught their eye and left the rest of the scrap metal untouched. A group of dozens of people like the one in front of them could be wiped out with just a few people. After a while, Fang came over with a smile and said, "Young master, after we arrive in Shuzhou, do you want to put the goods down first and come again?" This guy was really addicted to being a bandit. He had been in a state of excitement for the past 2 days. If he called the people from Willow Leaf Village, would they sweep all the nearby mountains? Except for the 2 gurus, the rest of the 100 or so people were the best of the best. If these people really followed him and became bandits, perhaps his original dream would come true. Li now wanted to grow wings and fly back. He didn't have the time to do this. He glared at him and said, "Hurry up. It's getting dark. Let's find a place to rest first and ask those bandits where their dens are." Fong responded and walked over. He slapped the head of the bandit and said, "You're still wearing a red headscarf. You're a disgrace to us bandits. Tell me, where's your stronghold?" The bandit leader asked in a trembling voice, "You are also bandits?" Fong slapped his head again and said, "Don't talk so much nonsense. Lead the way." The bandit leader looked around. There were many people as strong as the strong man. One person could beat more than 10 of them. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. They were all bandits, but why was the gap between them so big? Fong slapped him again and said, "You're still looking. It's just ahead." All the bandits sighed and felt sad. They were all bandits. Why did bandits make things difficult for other bandits? Li rode on the horse and followed behind Mississippi Lu. At a certain moment, he inadvertently looked up and saw the expression on her face and the flickering light in her eyes. He couldn't help but be stunned. 100 miles ahead, a group of nearly 100 people was slowly traveling on a rugged mountain path. "Lady Fong, we've been walking for a day. Do you want to stop and rest?" The man with the surname Fong lifted the curtain of the carriage and asked with concern. The middle-aged Taoist nun was sitting cross-legged in the carriage. Her face was pale and she looked rather weak. She opened her eyes and said, "It's getting dark. We'll go a little further and set up camp here before it gets dark." "Yes." The man with the surname Fong responded and immediately waved his hand behind him. He said loudly, "Move faster. We'll set up camp here before it gets dark." The man with the surname Fong tripped on a rock on the mountain path and staggered. After he steadied himself, he looked down and revealed an extremely gloomy expression. If it weren't for the fact that they were worried about running into Li Yi while traveling through Chong province, they wouldn't be able to fight against those martial arts experts with their current manpower. Why would they take this path? At this moment, his heart was undoubtedly filled with deep resentment towards that detestable name. What he couldn't get over was that this person was clearly a great enemy of the holy religion. Yet, the Lady Fong had given him the token of the Blue Dragon envoy. He was afraid that there would be no small amount of trouble in the future. Thinking of this, he raised his head and glanced at the carriage in front of him. A look of dissatisfaction appeared on his face. Chapter 724. Fong Province, which had been shrouded in darkness for a long time, finally saw the light of dawn today. The reason was that the eldest prince and a group of supervising censors would leave Fong Province today. The actions of these people in Fong Province had a great impact on the people of Fong Province. Even a 3-year-old child knew that the first prince was not a good person. The words "supervising censor" were enough to stop children from crying at night. Of course, these people, including the eldest prince, had now become a joke in Fong Province. 100 personal guards made a fool of themselves in front of so many people. Early that morning, another censor with the surname Yang was sent back from Bing Province. He had been kidnapped by a group of robbers. Perhaps they were worried that the officials of the capital would be involved and the matter would be blown out of proportion, so they didn't make things difficult for him. Some insiders said that when the censor was sent back, other than becoming a bit deranged, there was nothing wrong with him. After the eldest prince and his entourage were sent out of the city gate, the entire Fong Province ushered in a carnival. The night market, which had not been opened for a long time, was opened early when the sky had just darkened. Fong Province was brightly lit, and every family was in a jubilant mood. Lin Yong looked at the lights coming from the small courtyard next to Fong Lin Garden. He walked through the courtyard and knocked on the door saying, "Miss, the shopkeepers of the Ma Su and Bai families have been standing in front of the Lin family's door for a day and a night. Old master asked me to ask you if you want to see them." "It's too late. Let's talk about it tomorrow morning." After a long time, a voice came from the room again. "Tomorrow?" Lin Yong nodded and looked up at the sky. There were no stars, so he shook his head and said, "Look at the weather, it might rain tonight." They are standing there in the cold. "I don't know where the Li brothers have gone to." In a small county town dozens of miles away from Fong Province. In the relay station, Zhao Jing looked at Zhao Yi and said in a deep voice, "I was framed." Zhao Yi nodded and said, "I know. They kidnapped Yang Kong. He has the token of Prince Heng's mansion, Zhao Jing said again. Zhao Yi nodded again and said, I know. It's useless even if I know. He turned his head to look at Zhao Zheng and said, in the end, the matter of discussing the silver of guilt was caused by Imperial brother and Imperial father does not know. Zhao Yi sighed and said, when you return to the capital this time, I'm afraid you have to make preparations. Zhao Zheng clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. He couldn't understand how he, the Grand Crown Prince of the Qi Kingdom, had ended up in such a predicament when he had the upper hand. Who was that master who didn't leave his name? Neither the eldest prince of the Qi Kingdom nor the eldest prince of the Jing Kingdom could figure it out. The King of Shu's eyes were bloodshot as he smashed an inkstone on the table. The inkstone struck the forehead of a guard who was kneeling below. Blood immediately gushed out, but the guard did not dare to wipe it with his hands. Trash, all of you are trash. It's already been 3 days and not a single clue has been found. The county magistrate of Yong County stood in the corner. Beside him, Jiang Zian lowered his head and said nothing. 3 days ago, the treasury of the King of Shu's mansion was ransacked by a group of bandits. They dug a secret tunnel from the outside all the way into the treasury. It was not discovered until the next day. At that time the treasury was already empty. All the gold and silver treasures had been stolen. Not even a copper coin was left for the King of Shu. In other words, the King of Shu was probably the poorest prince in the Jing Kingdom now. If it wasn't for his identity, he would be worrying about what to eat for his next meal. In the past 3 days, the King of Shu had lost count of how many times he had lost his temper. However, 3 days had passed, and the entire Shuzhou had not been able to find out who the culprit was. Jiang Zian could understand the King of Shu. If the small box he had hidden under his bed had been stolen, he might have been even more furious than the King of Shu. After all, the entire Shuzhou was the King of Shu's fief. He could easily plunder it a few times and obtain countless taels of silver. Jiang Zian's private savings were accumulated little by little. Get out, all of you, get out of here. If you can't get it back, don't come back to see me. The King of Shu overturned a few tables and chairs. Seeing this, the crowd immediately retreated. Walking out of the mansion, Jiang Zian looked at the county magistrate of Yong County and said, Fang Yong and the others left 3 days ago. Could it be? The county magistrate shook his head and said, impossible. Given his relationship with Her Highness, how could he do such a thing? Jiang Zian nodded and simply kept his mouth shut. The man named Fang Yong obviously had an unusual relationship with Her Highness. Every time they talked, he would drive them away. These things were not something they could handle. In addition, there was another thing that made him feel a myriad of emotions in his heart. In fact, he could no longer describe the specific feelings. That person was finally coming back. Jiang Zian sighed and looked in the direction of the city gate with an indescribable expression. After leaving Shuzhou and going south for another 100 miles, it was the chaotic place that people avoided. There were countless mountain bandits and bandits in the mountains. They often went down the mountains to loot caravans and disturb people's lives. Because of its special geographical location, both the Jing Kingdom, the Qi Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom adopted a laissez-faire attitude towards this place, which directly made the bandits there more rampant. Every night, if you looked down from the highest peak, you would find that the mountains were lit up with many lights, which showed that there were many bandits in the mountains. At this moment, a voice rang out from one of the thatched cottages on one of the mountains that was lit up with a faint light. Big brother, they outnumber us. Why don't we run away? The way down the mountain has been blocked by them. How can we run away? Tomorrow morning we will fight to the death with them. At that time we brothers will fight to the death for Big Brother. Big Brother just needs to escape and go back to live a good life with sister-in-law. Big Brother, please take care of our family. What are you talking about? I brought you out. How can I run away alone? Inside the thatched cottage, the candlelight was weak and swaying, but the inside of the cottage was not dark. Perhaps it was because there was a shiny bald head that reflected the light in all directions. Several bandits stepped forward and tried to persuade him, Big Brother, all of you stop talking. The bald bandit waved his hand and said, since you've embarked on this path, this day will come sooner or later. Tomorrow find an opportunity and run away if you can. Staying alive is more important than anything else. He looked at the endless swaying shadows of trees outside the window and sighed in his heart. He had thought that with his hot blood, he and his brothers could make a name for themselves here. He didn't expect that after only 2 months, they would be forced into a dead end. In this place where the strong preyed on the weak would either die or be swallowed up by the stronger ones. 2 months ago they had just dispersed a small bandit group here, but they didn't expect that 2 months later, they would make a comeback and there were already dozens of them. The few of them would never be able to defeat them. Now that their only escape route down the mountain had been blocked, it was impossible to escape. They could only fight with all their might. The bald bandit collected his thoughts and turned to look at the crowd. He said, "If anyone escapes tomorrow, remember to help me pass a message to my tigress." Bang. As soon as he finished speaking, the door to the thatched cottage was kicked open. A figure that was as sturdy as the bald bandit blocked the door. A middle-aged woman dressed in coarse clothes stood there, looking at him and saying coldly, "If you have anything to say it to me personally now." The woman's appearance was ordinary, but her figure was extremely sturdy. However, the most eye-catching thing was not her sturdy figure, but the two mountain-splitting hammers in her hands, and her head that was also shiny without a single strand of hair. Especially after she walked into the thatched cottage, the entire room seemed to have become much brighter. "Why are you here?" The bald man was stunned, his face revealing a look of disbelief as he blurted out loudly. After speaking, he seemed to realize something and subconsciously retracted his head. His voice was as soft as a mosquito's. "Why are you here?" Chapter 725. The so-called mountain bandits were so weak that it was disappointing. Along the way they had destroyed many of the bandits' nests, but there was not a single casualty. Not to mention death, there was not even a single injury. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to go back, he really wanted to stay here for 10 days or half a month and sweep through the surroundings. It was a virtue to pluck feathers when a goose passed. No matter how small a mosquito was, it was still meat. In any case, he had encountered nothing good. He would just treat it as getting rid of evil for the people. Fang revealed a look of anticipation and said, "Young master, why don't you think about it again? We've already come this far. It would be a pity if we don't do something big." Li looked at him and said, "Why don't we go back and leave some people here for you?" "No, of course I want to go back with you." Fang shook his head. It was fine for him to stay here for a few more days, but he couldn't stand to stay here for a long time. "I'm going to the front to relieve myself." He turned over and got off the horse. When he walked forward, someone followed him. "Brother Fang, I'll go with you." Li Yi turned around and asked Yang Liuqing, "How long until we get to Shuzhou?" Yang Liuqing replied, 2 more days. Li Yi calculated. From Shuzhou to the capital, if they traveled day and night like before and went by the nearest waterway, it would take about a month. It would be a little slower to go back, but it would take about a month and a half to get there. This time he didn't leave home for a long time, less than 4 months, but it happened to be at a time when he shouldn't have left. But fortunately, everything was still in time. Not far behind Li Yi, the sloppy old man threw a candy into his mouth, shook the reins and took 2 steps forward. He looked at Yang Liuqing and asked, "How is that old guy Yang Wanli? He's not dead yet, right?" Yang Liuqing glanced at him and said lightly, "I don't know what you're talking about and I don't know any Yang Wanli." This old man still recognizes Cloud Piercer. "Back then Yang Wanli used this move to fight me to a draw. But that was a matter of decades ago, you weren't even born yet." The sloppy old man smacked his lips and said, "For the sake of martial arts, that old guy even gave up the throne. He definitely wouldn't teach this move to an outsider. Could it be that you're his daughter?" After saying this, he shook his head and denied, "That's also impossible. That old guy can't find a woman. He only likes swords and no woman would like him. Could it be that you're his disciple? And I've never heard of him accepting a disciple." Yang Liuqing glanced at him and asked, "Dare I ask if Senior has a family?" The sloppy old man's expression froze. He looked at her and said with dissatisfaction, "Little girl, what do you mean by that? This old man is different from that old guy. This old man didn't have a family because this old man doesn't want to have one. Back then this old man was also handsome and elegant. If you don't believe me, you can go back and ask that old guy Yang Wanli." Yang Liuqing glanced at him and didn't say anything. The sloppy old man's expression froze again. "What kind of attitude is that? Don't go, stop for this old man. Run, I want to see where else you can run to." A man with a black cloth covering his eyes and a scar on his face looked at the people in front of him. He waved his hand and said, "Capture them for me. Capture them alive. I want to properly torture this baldy." Behind the knife-scarred man, dozens of figures slowly approached the front. "Big brother." On the other side, seeing those people approaching, someone said in a low voice. The bald man said in a low voice, "We can only fight. Remember, staying alive is more important. Don't worry about me. If there's a chance, run." With that, he gripped the long sword in his hand tightly and took the lead to charge. The two bandits at the very front were first cut down by him. At the same time, two sharp lights went straight for his chest. Bang! Bang! After two muffled sounds, the two bandits were sent flying back. The bald woman held two giant hammers in her hands and stood beside the bald man. She said coldly, "If you want to touch my man, you have to ask the hammers in my hands first." The 10 or so bandits who were about to charge forward couldn't help but take 2 steps back. They watched as their 2 companions at their feet held their chests and vomited blood. They were actually frightened by the valiant bald woman. The scarred man rode on his horse and said angrily, "What are you still standing there for? Go. You people are afraid of a woman. All of you go and capture them alive. We'll hold a banquet to celebrate tonight." The bandits received the order and suppressed the shock in their hearts. They raised the weapons in their hands and charged forward. "Go. Come on. So what if you have more people? I'm not afraid." Although there were less than 10 people on the bald man's side, their momentum was not inferior in the slightest, and they fearlessly faced the enemy head-on. The bald man obviously had some skills. Ordinary bandits would be cut down by him in a single exchange. The valiant woman was even more powerful. The 2 giant hammers in her hands were extremely agile. If one was hit head-on, he would immediately be unable to get up. Even a graze would be extremely painful. "Surround them. Surround those 2 baldies," the scarred man commanded from his horse. Immediately, 2 groups of about a dozen bandits gathered together and surrounded the 2 of them. The rest of the bandits went to surround the others. 2 fists were no match for 4 hands. Although the bald man and his wife were slightly better, they could only protect themselves when surrounded by enemies several times their strength. It was difficult for them to break through. Seeing that his brothers had been subdued, the bald man was so angry that his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. When he tried to charge out with all his strength, a knife struck his leg and he immediately knelt on the ground. "My husband!" the valiant woman shouted and waved her hammers to force the crowd away. She guarded him by her side and gripped her hammers tightly. Her eyes coldly stared at the surroundings. The scarred man dismounted from his horse and came to the bald man's brothers who had been tied up. He waved his knife and said, "If you swing your hammers again, I will cut them once. I wonder how long these people can last." The valiant woman's expression finally changed. She looked down at the bald man and threw the 2 hammers to the ground. When the surrounding bandits saw this, they immediately put their weapons against his neck. The bald man lowered his head and said in a low voice, "I'm sorry. I've implicated you." The valiant woman glared at him and said, "We're going to die. What's the point of saying this now?" Then she raised her head and looked at the scarred man. She said coldly, "If you want to kill me, then kill me. Give me a quick death. Don't talk nonsense." "Give you a quick death?" The scarred man glanced at her and said, "In your dreams? Men, tie them up for me first." 2 figures shuttled through the dense forest. A thin figure turned his head and asked, "Brother Fong, how did you train your strength?" "It's so scary." Fong patted him on the shoulder and said, "You'd better not think about it. With your body you can't take it." Now that he thought of the days when he pushed the merry-go-round, he still felt his legs tremble. The young man looked at him and said with a smile, "Tell me. I was born with it. It's useless for you to train." Fong shook his head and said, "However, if you want to train harder, it's not impossible. When we go back this time, the amusement park in the brothel will be built soon. You can report to me then." The young man hurriedly nodded and said, "Thank you, Brother Fong." Fong nodded and said, "Let's go to the front. I'm about to suffocate." The 2 of them passed through a thicket and stood on a low slope. They untied their pants and closed their eyes. Soon the sound of water could be heard from below. When they were done and opened their eyes, they couldn't help but be stunned. Just below the low slope, several figures were tightly tied up. They were kneeling on the ground and looking at them in a daze. Looking down, there were dozens of figures in front of them. Each of them looked fierce. It was obvious that they were bandits in the mountain. Fong's body couldn't help but tremble. He pulled up his pants and looked down. "I'm just peeing. You guys continue." The scarred man wiped the water off his face and gritted his teeth. "Catch them and cut them off." Chapter 726. Cut. Fong looked down, then looked at the scarred man and said, "That's a bit too much." The scarred man suppressed his disgust and wiped his face with his sleeves, saying in a low voice, "They should be their accomplices. Capture them first." As soon as he finished speaking, the dozen or so bandits had already climbed up the slope. The youth beside Fong fastened his pants, then turned to look at him and asked, "Brother Fong, should we do it?" Fong looked around and nodded, "Let's do it." As soon as he finished speaking, the dozen or so bandits flew down the slope. While the scarred man was still in a daze, a black shadow had already pressed down from above and kicked him off his horse. His expression was twisted in pain, looking extremely hideous. He gritted his teeth and said, "Hurry up and attack." Without needing his order, the other bandits had no choice but to attack. That was because the tall and short, one muscular and one skinny man, had already come down the slope and were charging at the bandits. Although the skinny youth was thin and small, his leg skills were truly impressive. The bald man and the others were kneeling on the ground and couldn't see him move at all. It was also because he hadn't made a move at all. Just the indistinct leg shadows were enough to dazzle the eyes. The bandits that approached him all fell to the ground with footprints on their bodies. As for the burly man, he and the others looked in a certain direction. Even in a situation where he was tied up, he still revealed an extremely shocked expression. The burly man didn't have any weapons. He only relied on his iron fists and body. No matter how dense the sword shadows were, they couldn't touch him at all. It was hard to imagine that such a large person could be so nimble, and the bandits that came into contact with his fists all fell to the ground without exception. Just now, he had even used his body to send 3 bandits flying several meters away. This wasn't a human, he was clearly a ferocious beast. The skinny youth kicked another person and couldn't help but praise, "Brother Fong, you're amazing." Fong looked at him and said casually, "Kid, you're not bad either. You purposely didn't want to be on the heaven roll, right?" The skinny youth smiled and said, "The heaven roll is just a target. Even if I go up, I'll still be behind. It's better to be safe." The bald woman stared blankly at the two who were like tigers in a flock of sheep. She turned her head and asked, "Where did you recruit these people from?" The bald man was stunned and murmured, I don't know." The scarred man sat on the ground, his eyes wide open. In just a short while, only a dozen or so of his subordinates were still standing. From the looks of it, the remaining people wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Who the hell were these two fellows? His face revealed a look of horror. He looked left and right and his eyes stopped on the bald man. "Stop." Old Fong and the skinny young man were fighting with all their might when a voice suddenly rang in their ears. Turning his head, he saw the scar-faced man place his knife on the neck of the bald man kneeling on the ground. He shouted, "You two stop right now. If you don't stop, I'll..." Fong looked at him and asked, "What will you do?" The scar-faced man said sternly, "I will kill him." "Then go ahead and kill him." Fong kicked the last bandit to the ground and crossed his arms. "It's not like I know him." The bald man's eyes widened. The scar-faced man's angry expression froze. He swallowed and said, I really will kill. If you want to kill me, then kill me." Fong looked at him and said, "Do you think I'll be threatened by you? Even if my head falls off, I'll still be a good man in 18 years. The bald man, seeing the monster walking toward him, the scar-faced man revealed a look of fear. He said with a trembling voice, Don't come over." Fong glanced at the thin young man. The thin young man nodded and turned into a blur. A flying rock flew through the air and knocked the knife out of the scar-faced man's hand. The knife and the rock collided, producing a crisp sound. The bald man's ears rang and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the knife was stuck in a tree. His back was drenched in cold sweat. That rock had almost brushed past his ear. If it had been just a little more, wouldn't his head have been split open? The scar-faced man's hand also split open from the recoil. He took a few steps back and actually ran without hesitation. The bald man looked left and right, a trace of relief appearing on his face. No matter who these two people were, they were finally saved today. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, he suddenly heard a cacophony of noises, and the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. The bald man turned around and saw a cloud of dust rising from the road behind him, as well as the silhouettes within it. His face paled once more. After the sound of reining in a horse, a tall and strong man looked at the scar-faced man. He frowned and said, "Scar, dozens of people can't beat these few. What do you do?" The scar-faced man was stunned for a moment before a trace of joy appeared on his face. He said loudly, "Master, we had already caught these people, but we don't know where these two troublesome people came from. That's why." The scar-faced man waved his hand and said, "That's enough. This time there's a big caravan passing through here. This is a big fat sheep. If you alarm me, be careful of your head." The scar-faced man was stunned. He didn't know which big caravan would dare to pass through here. Wasn't it stupid? However, he quickly recovered and pointed at the two people in front of him. He said, "It's those two guys in front. Master, be careful." The thin man looked at the dense crowd in front of him and asked, "Brother Fong, are we going to do it this time?" "Do it my ass." Fong glared at him. No matter how he looked at it, there were more than 200 people in front of him. If they really did it, the two of them would die of exhaustion. He quickly tore the ropes on the people who were tied up and said, "What are you waiting for? Run." After the ropes were untied, the bald man immediately stood up. Ignoring his bleeding thigh, he cupped his fists and said, "Thank you, hero, for saving us." Fong waved his hand and looked at the opposite side. He looked back and murmured, "They should be here soon, right?" "What?" the bald man asked doubtfully. As soon as the words left his mouth, he saw a carriage coming from the end of the road in front of him. Then 2 carriages, 3 carriages, when more than 10 carriages, which were obviously loaded with goods, came from the front, the bald man was stunned on the spot. He finally understood why the notorious Jinshan tiger of this generation would come out personally. This caravan is really stupid. How stupid must they be to pass through the fringe so openly? Brothers, the fat sheep is here. The strong-looking man rode on his horse with an excited look on his face. He said loudly, "After this, it will be enough for us to enjoy ourselves for a while. Keep your spirits up." Fong looked at the opposite side and clenched his fists. He turned back and said in a loud voice, "Move faster, it's time to work." As soon as the man's voice faded, many figures came out from the caravan. They were armed with all kinds of weapons and walked towards them with ease. The bald man felt his mind go blank. Have these people gone mad? Or has the world changed? Since when did fat sheep dare to attack mountain bandits? Aren't they rushing to their deaths? Who do they think they are? Do they think they are as powerful as these two? When the strong-looking man saw this, he smiled instead of getting angry. He waved his hand and said, "What are you waiting for? Go." When the two parties collided, the bald man's mouth was agape and he couldn't close it. His brothers and the bald woman were also dumbfounded. Like crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. What bullsh asterisk Tijinshan tiger. His name is so resounding, and he even said that he's the most powerful bandit leader of this generation. It's all bullsh asterisk T. In an instant he was dragged down from his horse by one of the bandits. After 2 kicks he lay motionless on the ground. The others were also like chickens and dogs that couldn't withstand a single blow. No, it wasn't that they were chickens and dogs, it was that they had encountered a group of monsters. One person, even if they could defeat one of them, it would still be fine. Have you ever seen someone catch a blade or an arrow empty-handed? Have you ever seen someone punch someone? Have you ever seen a horse fall to the ground with a single punch? Have you ever seen bandits rob merchant caravans? Have you ever seen a merchant caravan robbing a bandit? He had really seen it. When the burly man stepped on Jinshan Tiger's head and asked him where their lair was and what valuable items they had, the bald man felt as though the faith he had built up over a long period of time had crumbled. Who are the bandits and who are the fat sheep? Is this world still the same as the world I'm familiar with? Chapter 727. Robbing was something that could be left to others. If a grandmaster were to do it himself, it would seem rather degrading. The sloppy old man would at most stand at the side and watch from afar when they attacked. However, although these people looked average to him, there was no need to watch from the side when dealing with a few bandits. Therefore, the sloppy old man would always watch from the side. This time he only glanced at them as usual. When he looked in a certain direction, his gaze paused for a moment, then he walked over and asked in surprise, "Why is it you again?" "A senior." The bald bandit also recognized this senior whom he had met a few times. A hint of surprise flashed across his face, and he immediately bowed and spoke respectfully. The sloppy old man looked him up and down. Seeing his disheveled appearance, he said, "Why are you in such a sorry state again?" The bald bandit lowered his head awkwardly. After being hit 3 times in a row, no matter how thick-skinned he was, he could not maintain his composure. The bald woman raised her eyebrows and looked at the sloppy old man. She said angrily, "Who are you? My man, I need you to tell me." "Shut up." The bald bandit knew how terrifying this old man was. After glaring at her, he hurriedly turned to look at the sloppy old man and said with a smile, "My lowly wife has not seen the world," and spoke arrogantly. "Senior, please don't blame her, don't blame her." Seeing this, the few people behind the bald bandit widened their eyes. "Lowly? Who are you calling lowly? I haven't seen you for a few days and you've grown up." The bald woman pulled his ear and said fiercely, "Get over here." Seeing their big brother being dragged to the side, the bandits all had expressions of schadenfreude on their faces. Having escaped from death, their hearts that were hanging in suspense were finally at ease. Li and Mississippi Lou walked over and looked at them. He said in surprise, "Why are you guys again?" The bandits looked awkward. Li looked at the sloppy old man and asked, "Sue knows them too?" The sloppy old man nodded and said with a chuckle, "That little Baldy is an interesting person." Li looked at them and asked, "Tell me, why are you guys here?" Looking at the three people opposite them, the awkwardness on their faces deepened. After being a bandit for so long, he really didn't have the face to say it again. The other side. The bald woman let go of the bald man's ear and asked, "What's going on?" The bald man shook his head and said, "It's nothing. I've only met them twice before." The bald woman nodded and squatted down. She looked at his wound and asked, "Is your injury okay?" "Skin injury." The bald man shook his head and suddenly said, "Let's go back and live a good life from now on. We won't be bandits anymore." The woman coldly snorted and said, "You don't want to inherit your father's dying wish? Are you satisfied if you don't make a name for yourself? Aren't you afraid that I'll continue beating you up when we get back?" The bald bandit rubbed his bald head and smiled awkwardly. "Living a good life is better than hanging my head on a belt. If you want to hit me, then hit me. But, can you bear to hit me, dead man?" The bald woman glared at him and said, "Heal your wounds first. We'll talk about the future in the future." The bald man smiled foolishly. Li didn't expect the bald bandit's road to be so tortuous. Nothing could happen more than 3 times, but he had been defeated 3 times in a row. His perseverance alone was enough to move people. It would be a waste of talent if such a person didn't become a bandit. Especially this kind of person who had principles, a bottom line, perseverance, and was willing to work hard. There weren't many of them. The Fringe was a place that he had set his sights on for a long time. But because of the long distance and his lack of understanding of the place, he didn't take any substantial action. This time he just happened to pass by. Just as Fong said, it wasn't easy to come here. If he didn't do something, it would be a waste of an opportunity. This place was a treasure trove waiting to be mined. Seeing that the bandits were all wounded, Li beckoned to Fong and said, "Call a few people over and help them tend to their wounds." Then he saw the bald man limping over with a wound on his thigh that was still bleeding. Li pointed at him and said, "Your wound needs to be tended to too." "No need." The bald man shook his head. Before he could say the word "no need," the bald woman pinched him hard on his waist. Not long after, the bald man saw that someone was sewing his thigh with a needle and thread. He asked in surprise, "Why does this thing look like it's sewing a pocket? Will it work?" The bald woman behind him smacked his head and said, "Shut up. You talk too much. It'll heal faster if you stitch it up." Li was a little surprised. Although this bald man was unlucky, he was a real man. He didn't make a sound while stitching up his wound and even looked at it curiously. Li didn't know if he was really good at enduring or just stupid. Li looked at him and asked, "You haven't given up after so many times. Do you really like being a bandit?" The bald man raised his head and waved his hand. "I quit. I wanted to be a bandit before, but I didn't know what it was like to be a bandit. Now it seems that I'd rather go back and live my life. It's better than being hacked to death." He really understood now. It wasn't just a caravan. Any random robber on the road could wipe them out. What was the point of being a bandit? His future was bleak. Li was stunned for a moment. He looked at the bald man and said, "Young people should have dreams. Don't give up just because of a little setback. Nothing can be done in one go. Only by enduring hardship can you achieve success." The bald bandit sighed. "Sigh, I'm not young anymore. Middle-aged people should also struggle. As long as life is alive, the battle will not stop. One couldn't only care about oneself. One had to persuade others to do good." Li looked at the bald bandit and asked, "Touch your conscience. Do you really want to give up?" The bald man showed a hint of hesitation. After a moment he sighed and said, "We've all lived a hard life. I don't want to rob those poor people. As for the caravan," the bald man turned his head to look at the person lying on the ground not far away. He didn't say anything. What he wanted to say was that a caravan with brains wouldn't take this path. They needed to go down the mountain and rob further away. They also needed to steal business from other bandits. Brainless caravans, they couldn't compete with brainless caravans. Robbing the poor and robbing caravans is the lowest level of bandits. Li patted his shoulder and said, "Robbing bandits is the king of bandits." "Robbing bandits?" The bald man looked at him with a dazed expression. Crush. Fong walked over with large strides and threw a large bag on the ground. He said, "Young master, these were found on the bodies of those bandits. I heard from them that there are even more good things in their stronghold. I've already sent people over." The bald man looked over and saw that the bag was filled with gold and silver. There was quite a lot of them. He was stunned once again. He thought about the scholar's words again. Gradually, a look of understanding appeared on his face. He licked his lips and a strange light shone from his eyes. Chapter 728. A soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier. A tailor who didn't want to be a cook wasn't a good coachman. A bandit who didn't want to be the king of bandits wasn't a good baldy. The bald man really wanted to be a bandit. His grandfather was a bandit, his grandfather's grandfather was a bandit, his grandfather's grandfather's grandfather was a bandit. It was too long ago to trace back that far. All in all, his ancestors had this fine tradition for generations. When it came to his father's generation, he had no choice but to turn over a new leaf because his territory was taken away. With such a glorious history, how could he be willing to be mediocre? That was why he wanted to recreate the glory of his ancestors. But he failed. Once, twice, thrice. As the saying goes, nothing can happen more than 3 times. After failing 3 times in a row, and it was a crushing defeat without any suspense, anyone would be disheartened. But he still couldn't accept it. The scholar in front of him had indeed opened a new window for him. However, a thought was just a thought. He needed to have the strength to match it. In the fringe, bandits slaughtered and annexed each other's territories. The winner would naturally obtain a bigger territory and accept everything from the loser. As for the loser, he could only choose to submit or die. He didn't want to choose either of these 2 paths. The bald man waved his hand and said, "Forget it. The fringe isn't that simple. I might lose my life one day." Li shook his head regretfully and said, "All right then. Fong, go ask around and see who is willing to stay here. The first batch of people who stay will be treated like a manager. They will be given a house and a wife after 3 years. They can stay or leave as they please." Fong patted his chest and said, "Don't worry, young master. Along the way those fellows have been suppressing their evil thoughts. Some of them have mentioned it to me. I'll go and talk to them now." The bald man was stunned and asked, "What do you mean?" Li waved his hand and said, "Don't worry. Our people aren't familiar with this place. It's inconvenient for them to stay here. We need to find a guide who is familiar with this place. I think that mountain tremor tiger is a good choice. Go and ask him if he's willing." "Do something?" The bald man mumbled. After thinking for a while, he immediately understood what Lin Xing meant by "do something." They were going to do something big. These people were all like monsters. The mountain-shaking tiger was powerful enough and could be considered the largest bandit force in this area, but the other party only sent a dozen people to easily annihilate them. If he really had the help of these people, then whatever tiger of the mountain or soaring dragon of the heavens, they would all be **T. If he was a tiger, he had better lie low. If he was a dragon, he had better coil up. When the time came, he would take over their territory, manpower, and influence. Oh my God! The light that had been extinguished in the bald man's eyes finally reignited. He looked at Li Yi with bright eyes and asked seriously, "Mountain-shaking tiger is a two-faced man. He's not a good guy. I'm also very familiar with this place. What do you think of me?" "Let me think about it." Li looked at him, thought for a moment and said, "I don't think mountain-shaking tiger is that kind of person. I have to talk to you about this." The bald man moved a stone and sat opposite him. He shook his head and said, "This mountain-shaking tiger was not a good guy before he became a bandit. He killed someone and was forced by the government, so he escaped here. He first joined a stockade, then poisoned the stockade chief and sat on the throne himself. Then, after a while, Fong came over and said, 'Young master, there are a total of 27 people who are willing to stay.' This number surprised Li Yi quite a bit. The capital was so prosperous and lively, and they had everything they wanted. There was no lack of leisure and entertainment. Yet there were still so many people willing to stay in such a desolate place. What was wrong with them? What kind of people did Mississippi Lu recruit? When he saw what Mississippi Lu said to those people over there, Li Yi understood that it was not what kind of people Mississippi Lu recruited, but what kind of leader they recognized. According to the bald macho man, the mountain-shaking tiger was really a bastard who had ulcers on the soles of his feet and pus on the top of his head. No one knew when he would stab someone in the back. Therefore, the job of tour guide and consultant naturally fell on the bald man who was fated with him. When he was thinking about some arrangements in his heart, a cold touch suddenly came to the tip of his nose. Li reached out and touched it. His fingertips were slightly wet. Looking up at the sky, Fong walked over quickly and said, "Young master, look at the sky. It's going to rain. Let's go to the mountain-shaking tiger's territory to hide from the rain. We'll leave when the rain stops." Li nodded. Fong walked over, waved his hand and said loudly, "It's raining. Everyone hurry up and keep up." The rain in the mountains really came without warning. As soon as they walked to the mountain-shaking tiger's place, before they had time to sit down, the heavy rain poured down. Li stood at the window and looked at it. It seemed that it would not stop for a while. The rain in the mountains comes and goes quickly. The rain should stop in an hour at most. However, it's raining so heavily that it should be difficult to walk later. The bald man was always trying to show his value. At this moment he stood at the door and showed that he knew the weather in the mountains very well. It turned out that this bald man might not be a good mountain bandit, but he was a good weather forecaster. After more than half an hour the rain really stopped. Although the rain was not light, it did not last long. The road was only slightly muddy. Fong came over and asked, "Young master, are we leaving?" Li waved his hand and said, "Let's stay here for the night and leave tomorrow." The muddy road was only one of the reasons. Since he had decided to do something here, of course he had to arrange the route and plan for the future. After all, he was far away in the capital. Everything here in the future still depended on them. Li looked at Fong and said, "Call Rui over." There were many things to plan. The first thing was how to deal with mountain-shaking tiger and the others. These vicious bandits should either be eliminated for the sake of the people and put an end to their troubles, or they should be crippled of their martial arts and sent to build roads, bridges and houses. As for the other small fries, they could not do the same. Of course, the roads still needed to be paved. First, they should be tempered to wear down their character. Then, they should be disorganized and reorganized. Those people could be trained to be the new base. Big fish preys on small fish preys on shrimps. The weak are prey to the strong. This is the law of the fringe. Today's boss might not be tomorrow's boss. Tomorrow's boss might be hacked to death in the evening. If it wasn't for the fact that they had no other choice, not many people would be willing to become bandits. Although they couldn't be completely trusted, they didn't need to be trusted to build a house or to be a lackey who could fight wherever he wanted. Among the small leaders, he could take a white rabbit creamy candy pill to control them. Every 3 months he would take a hawthorn pill to detoxify the poison. After that, he could let them control their subordinates. At the very least, there was no lack of poison experts among those who roamed the Jianghu. It was not impossible to consider using their real skills. However, this kind of method was a little too lowly. If it really came to that, it would be better to let them mine and build roads. There were some more detailed things that he had to discuss with Mississippi Lu. The sky gradually darkened. The candlelight in the room flickered. A map spread on the table gradually became more and more marks. First, nibble away at the small forces. As for the new recruits, we need to train them. We need a base that is easy to defend and hard to attack. This place definitely won't do. Look here. If we go deeper, it won't be as simple as bandits. Let's avoid them for now. From here, and here, the whispers in the room continued until late at night. Li put down his pen. Mississippi Lu walked to his bed and crawled into his newly made quilt. Sleep early? Li nodded habitually. After a moment of daze, he suddenly realized that he was no longer in Feng province. She was now sleeping on his bedding. Li stood by the table and began to think. Where should he sleep tonight? The map on the table was still spread out. It was filled with marks like O or X. The bulging marks were mountains, the thicker lines were rivers, and the thinner lines were roads. At this time, on a muddy mountain road, a group of more than 100 people was advancing with difficulty. What? The young man stepped into the quagmire, and his face darkened once more. He looked down at the raging river below and could not help but curse angrily. Damn rain, damn Li. Chapter 729. As a matter of fact, Li didn't sleep at all last night. His decision to intervene in the fringe's affairs wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This idea had been in his mind since a year ago or perhaps even longer. After all, in today's society, there was no such thing as a carefree life. He no longer had 1 or 2 people standing behind him. No matter what kind of trouble he might encounter in the future, he had to leave at least 17 or 18 escape routes for himself. He spent the entire night making the arrangements for the fringe's future as detailed as possible. Although he couldn't say that he covered every single detail, he wouldn't overlook the general direction. He also had to make arrangements for the people who would stay behind in the fringe one by one. He had to make the arrangements as detailed as possible to avoid future problems. This wasn't an easy task. It was physically and mentally taxing. When the oil lamp on the table gave its last spark and extinguished its flame, Li raised his head and saw that the sky was almost bright. "You didn't sleep at all last night?" Li turned around and saw Mississippi Lu getting off the bed and walking towards him with a coat draped over her shoulders. She still has the cheek to ask me such a question. Li covered his mouth and yawned. A wave of fatigue washed over him. "You're awake. I'm going to take a nap." He waved his hand, walked over, took off his shoes and coat and crawled into bed. "It's been a long time since I've smelled a fragrance from my bed. It's a completely different scent from Rui's. More importantly, this bed is still warm." For some reason the term bed warming maid suddenly popped up in his mind. Then after that he lost consciousness. Mississippi Lu turned around and walked to the table. She was startled when she saw the things on the table. She heard even breathing sounds coming from the bed. She turned around and looked again. She didn't look away for a long time. Young master, are you awake?" After an unknown period of time, a voice came from outside the door. She collected her thoughts and put on her clothes. After a simple wash, she opened the door. "We haven't seen each other for a few months and the son-in-law has become lazy. It's already so late and he's still not up." Fong stood at the door and muttered softly. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he heard a creaking sound behind him. "Goo." Fong turned around and swallowed his words. "I'm sorry, second miss, I went the wrong way." He quickly walked to the side and after looking left and right, a puzzled look appeared on his face. "That's right." Mississippi Lu walked out of the door, then turned around and said, "Don't disturb him. Let him sleep a little longer." Fong looked into the room. When he saw a figure lying on the bed, his eyes immediately widened. At this moment, his heart received an unprecedented impact. He needed to think carefully about what had happened during the few months when the son-in-law and second miss were away. Young miss, son-in-law, second miss. His mind was in a mess, even more so than every time he passed by Willow Lane. The weather in the mountains was indeed unpredictable. It had rained heavily yesterday, and the dark clouds in the sky seemed to be pressing down. When Li woke up, he washed up and walked out. The warm breeze was warm and the sun was shining brightly above his head. There was not a single cloud in the sky. The bald bandit said that there was a flash flood in a nearby stream, which was a common occurrence in the mountains. Li did not intend to delay. After 2 hours, he informed them of the strategic plans for the next 2 years and planned to set off today. When he left, he naturally left behind a sum of money. Regardless of whether it was to purchase rations or to recruit soldiers, they would need to spend a lot of money. Li had never been stingy when it came to investments with great potential. This time around, if it wasn't for the generosity of the Bing region's officials, he would have been a little short on money. When the bald bandit saw those chests, his eyes widened. After living for so long, this was the first time he had seen so much money. He subconsciously thought that they had robbed this along the way, and he no longer had any doubts about something. Robbing caravans was just a low-level bandit. Robbing bandits was the true bandit of bandits. As expected, they had really gone down the wrong path in the past. What happened next depended on them. For now, this was all the help Li could provide them. He did not know if it was because he did not make Fong stay, but Li felt that the way Fong looked at him today was very strange. His gaze was rich with emotions, which was extremely rare. However, no matter how strange it was, he did not intend to leave this fellow here. After all, no one but Fong himself could withstand the power of his wife. The bald bandit pointed to the rushing flood and said, "Follow this river. If everything goes well, we can reach Shu province in 3 to 5 days." Due to the heavy rain yesterday, the trickling stream had now turned into a muddy torrent. It was quite powerful. Fortunately, mountain torrents often broke out here. The river was so wide that it couldn't reach the shore, and the water couldn't reach the mountain path on one side. "Let's go." After Li cleared his throat and gave the order to set off, the creaking of the carriage came from behind. At a bend in the mountain path ahead, the man surnamed Fong's clothes were still wet and stuck to his body, making him feel especially uncomfortable. His shoes and socks were also wet and there was even water in his boots. His eyes were bloodshot, and the depression and anger in his heart had almost reached the limit. The nearly 100 figures around him were in the same situation. Ever since they entered the mountains, they had already encountered several groups of bandits. They all treated them as caravans. Although they were all weak bandits, they still brought them a lot of trouble and completely messed up their journey. The sudden rain yesterday had caught them unprepared, and they did not even have time to set up camp. Although they had rested for a night, the mountain was wet and their clothes were still wet. In such a state, the atmosphere was extremely oppressive as they walked on the bumpy mountain path. Damn it, Li, don't let me meet you again. As he cursed angrily, the group of people had already reached a bend in the mountain path. The carriage in front of them suddenly stopped. The youth named Fang looked up and saw that 1,000 feet away, the figure in front of them, as well as the creaking sound of the carriage, was very, very close. Protector, there seems to be a caravan in front. A hint of impatience appeared on the man surnamed Fang's face. Although he did not know which caravan dared to pass through here, since he had encountered them, there was no reason for him to let them go. He waved his hand and was about to speak when a figure suddenly flew out from the carriage. The middle-aged Taoist nun's face was slightly pale, and her eyes were filled with shock and uncertainty as she looked ahead. There really are caravans passing through this place. Li said in astonishment as he looked at the horse carriage and the silhouette of the people not far away from him. However, the surprise on his face quickly disappeared. Looking at the figures in blue and yellow, he dismounted and muttered, "It can't be." It was unknown when the sloppy old man had appeared beside him. After throwing a piece of candy into his mouth, he fiercely chewed and slowly said, "Yes." Old Taoist Yuan appeared on his other side. Looking at the figure in front, he said, "So it's her." Chapter 730. Good will be rewarded, evil will be punished. It's not that there will be no retribution, it's just that the time has not yet come. Good and evil will always be rewarded, the heavenly Tao reincarnates. If you don't believe it, look up, who will the heavens spare? Li had always believed in these two sentences, and he unswervingly followed them by example. He helped the elderly cross the road, picked up money and handed it to the authorities. Although he had not done any of these things, he had occasionally gone to Willow Lane to help two weak women carry water and cook. Therefore he had always thought that his encounter with Taoist nun was a result of God's glaucoma. Now God's glaucoma had been cured. In any case, he was a transmigrator and transmigrators were rare. Who knows, he might be used as a model by some discerning author in the future, and become the protagonist of a novel. With the protagonist's halo on his head, he would walk to the peak of his life, and in the end he would rule the world, embrace beauties and live a shameless life. As a protagonist, how could he be bullied? Li now knew that the process was full of twists and turns, but the result was already set in stone. All the twists and turns were waiting for him. Li looked left and right and said, "Elder Yuan Su, this time I'll leave it to you. Taoist priests and Taoist nuns, none of them are good." Su nodded strangely and said, "Leave that damn Taoist nun to me." The middle-aged Taoist priest glanced at him, but did not say anything. Li turned around, pointed to the front and said, "Those people are not simple, everyone be careful." Along the way they were already familiar with this kind of thing, and did not even need to explain or say much. The crowd behind them had already started moving. In front, looking at the crowd pressing toward them, as well as the two extremely dangerous figures in front of them, Taoist nun's face finally darkened. "Retreat." As soon as her voice fell, she had already disappeared. That thing, the youth surnamed Fang had already realized something and his expression changed. He looked ahead, then looked at the rushing torrent below, and waved his hand to the back, gritted his teeth and jumped down. He was already clear about the strength of those people. This time he had chosen this path to avoid them, but who would have thought? The man with the surname Fang's actions were like throwing a stone into the surging muddy water, instantly disappearing without a trace. Li looked at the yellow-clothed and blue-clothed people jumping into the mountain torrent like dumplings. He couldn't help but be stunned. After a long time he sighed and murmured, "They are really cruel to themselves." Su and Taoist Yuan went after the Taoist nun. As for the rest of the people, seeing that the situation was not good, they all jumped into the water and disappeared in an instant. Seeing that they did not hesitate at all, Li strongly suspected that the followers of the holy religion had really learned some secret techniques like the water escape technique. As the second most important person in the cult, he had never heard of something that even the ordinary members of the cult knew. The Taoist nun was so cunning. She actually hid it from him. In the end, there were still some people who did not react in time. Before they could use the water escape technique, their acupuncture points were sealed. There were about a dozen people. Naturally, these people could not jump into the water. The water was vast and mighty, and it was mixed with sand and stones. Even if the top experts jumped in, their lives would be in the hands of the heavens. If they did not know the water escape technique, they could only rely on the protection of the goddess. However, their goddess probably did not have the time to protect them now because she could not even protect herself. As Li Yi walked over, Fang ran over excitedly and said excitedly, young master, we are rich." He opened a few big boxes in a row. Even Li Yi could not help but be stunned when he saw the contents of the boxes. Gold and silver were the lowest grade here. All kinds of treasures, calligraphy, and paintings were piled up in the boxes like sundries. If they were all exchanged for silver, it would probably be an extremely terrifying number. They are actually so rich? This time, Li Yi was really a little shocked. The Taoist nun's base was in the Qi kingdom. This trip back from the Jing kingdom was actually able to gather so many treasures. Just how rich was their cult's foundation? Damn it, it was really too tempting. Li Yi still felt a little pained when he left the starting capital for the bald bandit and the others. But this time he did not dare to say that he would earn back tens of times the amount. Li Yi walked over and stopped in front of a man in yellow. He asked, "Speak, what are you doing here?" The man snorted coldly. "You betrayed the goddess. You will not have a good ending." These followers were stubborn. Li Yi had already experienced it. He did not know what method the Taoist nun had used to brainwash them so successfully. Fang picked him up with one hand and said, "Young master, wait for me for a while." Having said that, he walked towards a corner. After a while he came back and said, "Young master, I've asked him. He said that they were returning to the Qi kingdom this time. In order to avoid bumping into us, they took this path." This was fate. Everything was predestined. Although these treasures could not make up for what the Taoist nun had done to him, they could at least repay what they could. They could barely be considered compensation for the psychological damage. As for the physical body, they could talk about the physical body when there was a chance in the future. Fang hesitated for a moment and said, "Young master, there's one more thing." "What is it?" Li looked at him and asked. Fang pointed at the boxes and said in a low voice, "He said that these treasures were stolen from the king of Shu's treasury." This was the true meaning of fate. Li was stunned for a moment. He looked at Fang in confusion and asked, "What did you say just now?" Fang was stunned. He shook his head and said, "Did I say anything just now?" "No. You really didn't." Li was very pleased. After not seeing each other for a long time, Fang had finally become a little more understanding. Fang pointed at the men in yellow and asked, "Young master, what should we do with these people?" In fact, it was useless to keep these people. In the holy religion, the status and strength could be seen from the clothes they wore. The purple emissaries, blue emissaries, yellow emissaries, and then ordinary believers. The strength of these men in yellow was not high. Otherwise, they would not have been subdued without any time to react. These people were different from the mountain bandits. They were very stubborn and could not be subdued for their own use. It was better to let them invest in basic construction. Li waved his hand and said, "Send them to the bald man. They know what to do." Su came back very soon. He did not look very good. The middle-aged Taoist shook his head and said, "If a guru wants to escape, it is very difficult to stop her. Coincidentally, she is very good at lightness skills, so we did not catch up with her." Li shook his head, indicating that he did not care. Although he still felt a little regretful, he also knew that gurus were not that simple. He was mentally prepared and would not be too disappointed. Thinking of something, he looked at the middle-aged Taoist and asked, "Taoist Master Yuan, do you know her?" The middle-aged Taoist nodded and said, "I thought she would disappear without a trace. I did not expect that in just a short 20 years she has grown to such an extent. Taoist Master Yuan, is this Taoist nun related to you?" The slovenly old man glanced at him and asked with a frown, "You are so old and have one foot in the coffin. Could it be?" The middle-aged Taoist glanced at the slovenly old man and ignored him. He said slowly, "When I saw her, she was about the same age as Miss Lu. It was during the transition between the old and the new dynasties. Because the Fang family was involved in the factional struggle in the court, they were exterminated. Now that more than 20 years have passed, the hatred in her heart has not disappeared." He looked in a certain direction and sighed, "She is also a pitiful person." Chapter 731. The grudge between the Taoist nun and the old emperor was deep. Li had met them several times along the way. Although he did not know the ins and outs of the whole matter, he knew a little. Now he understood that there was more than just a grudge between them. The hatred of the extermination of the family was as deep as the sea. Although the old emperor had not ascended to the throne at that time, it was not wrong to put the blame on the old Li family. Killing an entire family and they were not allowed to rebel? Now that he thought about it, it had not been easy for the Taoist nun. Traveling to other countries and enduring humiliation for more than 20 years, not only did his martial arts cultivation reach Zhongshe realm, he even managed to develop such a huge faction. If this were to be placed in a novel or drama, it would definitely be used as a revenge plot of the protagonist, and there would be no need for any changes at all. His conscience told him that if this had happened to him, he would have taken even more extreme measures. However, understanding was one thing, but he could not forgive what the Taoist nun had done. The one who killed her family was the old emperor's father. Of course, there was no way to take revenge. It was too difficult to take revenge on the old emperor. Logically speaking, the most suitable target for her to kill, torture, and tie up should be the king of Shu. What did it have to do with him? Sympathy was sympathy, but he still had to repay what he owed. Although it was a pity that he did not catch the Taoist nun, he could not force her. Li waved his hand and said, "Hurry up and cover these things. Let's go quickly. We have to find a place to stay before it gets dark." Night gradually fell. Somewhere in the open space in the mountains, simple tents had been set up. Lights shone from the tents. Outside the tents, there was a roaring bonfire. Toasts were exchanged in the surroundings, and the deer legs above the fire were dripping with fat, making a sizzling sound. The roars of all kinds of beasts came from the mountains, but it did not affect this small carnival. Even a certain man sitting by the fire was still hesitating in his heart. How should he eat the bear that he had just hunted back? Dozens of miles away, a torrent of sand rolled away. The middle-aged Taoist nun carried a figure away from the riverbank and slowly walked deeper into the mountains. In the endless darkness, the shadows of the trees swayed like ferocious beasts choosing people to devour. There were also subtle sounds coming from it. There's actually someone. It's a Taoist nun. A Taoist nun is also passable. Several figures walked out of the darkness and chased after them. Shu Prefecture, King Shu's mansion. The king of Shu had become haggard in recent days. The servants in the residence could not relax, fearing that they would be scolded or punished by the king of Shu. "Your Highness, there's still no news." The king of Shu slumped on his seat. Someone came in from outside and said respectfully. The king of Shu looked up at him and asked, "Are you sure they are not in the Qi kingdom? We didn't find anything along the way." The king of Shu was slightly excited. Could it be that they met with an accident? The silver and treasures lost in the treasury might not be found this time, but if something happened to Li Yi and the others, such as choking to death while eating, choking to death while drinking water, or being crushed to death by a meteorite while walking, it would be good news for him. It could slightly dispel the depression in his heart and relieve his mood. At the thought of this possibility, even his face became slightly ruddy. It was also at this time that carriages drove into the city gate of Yong County. The guards at the city gate were about to go forward to check, but when they caught a glimpse of the sign shown by one of the carriages, their expressions changed and they immediately gave way respectfully. This was not the first time he had seen such a sign. The first time he saw it, it was because a general in the city had a conflict with those people. Now, when they were on duty every day, they would pass by the grave of that general. After the carriages entered the city gate, at the gate, there were immediately people running wildly toward the yamen. The streets of Yong County looked a little familiar to Li Yi. Not far away, the new Ru family inn had been built, but it had not opened for business yet. Standing at the entrance of the inn, Li Yi looked around. His surroundings had not changed much in the past few months, but his mood and situation were completely different from before and after. They had been traveling for nearly 10 days. Even if they were martial arts masters, they could not help but feel tired. After arriving in Shuzhou, everything was not so urgent. They could have a good sleep and recharge their energy. Tomorrow morning they would officially set foot on the road home. Not long after he settled down, someone came in to report that the county magistrate of Yong County had arrived. The county magistrate did not come alone. Accompanying him were all the officials in the county government. Li did not see Jiang Zian in the crowd, but he did not care. That brother Jiang should be feeling very bad at this time. All the officials in Yong County came to express their condolences, but they did not see the king of Shu. He had already arrived in Shuzhou. With the friendship between the two of them, why did the king of Shu not even show his face? Although the king of Shu might not be in a very good mood after his treasury was stolen, there was an old saying that a moment of spring night was worth 1,000 taels of gold. 1,000 taels of gold could be spent, but it would come back. Silver could be earned again if it was gone. Money was just a worldly possession. It was not too much to treat the king of Shu to a meal, was it? A stingy person would naturally not be able to achieve great things. The king of Shu would definitely not be able to achieve great things in the future. When he took a comfortable bath and lay on the bed for the first time in a long time, a satisfied expression appeared on his face. In the king of Shu's mansion, the young king of Shu's face was extremely gloomy. They are back. Your Highness, they have just arrived in Yong County. The king of Shu paced in the hall. After a while, someone came forward to report that the people from the intelligence office wanted to see him. No. Just say that I am not feeling well and will not see anyone. The king of Shu waved his hand impatiently and said, you can report to I when they have left. Although he wanted to cut someone into 1,000 pieces, he could not make the decision in Shuzhou at this moment. Even if he really met them, he would feel even more depressed. Out of sight, out of mind. He simply did not even want to see the people from the intelligence office. In the county government of Yong County, the county magistrate of Yong County waved his hand and called a yamen runner over. He asked, Lord Jiang just said that he was not feeling well. Is he feeling better now? The yamen runner shook his head and said, not yet. Lord Jiang has been resting in his room. The county magistrate knocked on the door and walked into a room. He saw Jiang Zian lying on the bed with a towel over his forehead and his face slightly pale. He asked with concern, Lord Jiang, how are you feeling? Do you need a doctor to come over? Jiang Zian shook his head with difficulty and said in a low voice, I am fine. I just reviewed a few cases last night. Maybe I caught a cold at that time. I will be fine after a few days of rest. The county magistrate sighed and said, Lord Jiang is a conscientious person. He is a role model for us. Jiang Zian said politely, it is my duty. It is what I should do. If it were not for the fact that he was in a hurry to rush back to the capital, Li Yi would definitely stay in Shuzhou for a few more days to catch up with the king of Shu and get to know him better. But other than the necessary rest, he really did not want to waste any time outside. Early the next morning, he and Mississippi Lu packed lightly and left the city on a few fast horses with Fong, the sloppy old man, and Taoist Yuan by their side. As for the people behind them, Yang Liuqing was in charge, so it was fine to go back slowly. When the people of Yong County began their busy day, somewhere far away from Yong County, Li Yi tightened the reins of his horse and whipped it again. Behind him was a trail of smoke and dust. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.